Good morning. Thank you for coming this morning. This is the general government subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. And I thank you for coming, and we'll go ahead and start the meeting. This is a meeting on the 2008 amended budget, and that's all we really are here to hear today. And wanted to give everybody an opportunity to come and for y'all have the opportunity to come before the subcommittee and give members of the subcommittee the opportunity to review the governor's recommendations and ask any questions, make any comments they might have on the amended budget. So we're starting this morning with the Office of the Governor, and I know we have somebody here, so if you would come on up and if you come over to come on over to the podium there, and I'll turn this on. That's a good idea. Do you have a copy of about the tracking sheet that we're working from? Okay.
I'll go ahead and get that out.
All right, if you would go ahead and begin. If you have anything that you would want to say to us or anything in here, I know that we're looking at the amended budget and everything is pretty flat and everything. But anything that you want to bring to us, I would welcome that at this time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Also, I just want to point out I have Charlie English here if there are any questions, because there is one line item in the amended budget request for the governor's office. But I did want to say, in keeping with the governor's principle on the amended budget, he did want to make sure that he kept his focus on emergency items and critical unanticipated needs. On that note, the one item for the Office of the Governor for the amended FY08 is a request or a recommendation for $4,098,491. That is for the governor's emergency fund. That number would bring us to a total of approximately $7.5 million in the balance. You'll notice that's somewhat more than what we would traditionally have, which is about $3.4 million. The reason is for twofold. One is starting with the fires in FY 2007, we actually ended the fiscal year with more expenditures than anticipated for FY07. So we started fiscal year 2008 somewhat in the hole with the governor's emergency fund with those tornadoes and fires, the disasters of last year. So $1.2 million, specifically $1,248,000 of that $4 million is focused on replenishing the governor's emergency fund back to traditional levels of approximately $3.4 million for the fiscal year 2008. The second half of that is a best estimate from Georgia Emergency Management Agency, GEMA, of about $2.8 million in anticipation of any potential damages as it relates to the drought. Those monies, couple things to point out about the governor's emergency fund is the governor has been very strict in his use of the emergency fund. It's using them exclusively on emergencies and natural disasters. So with any of the monies in the governor's emergency fund, if they're not expended, would simply stay in the Treasury. He doesn't use them for anything other than tornadoes, wildfires, drought. Hopefully we don't have any damages there, but in case we do, that's what the 2.8 is for. If you have any questions on this, I'm happy to answer, or we have other folks here that would answer in more detail if you have any questions.
Okay. Thank you. If you have any questions? Chairman Royal.
I just noticed where the agency request was for the $1,298,000, and the governor asked for another $2.8 million, and that's anticipating disasters in 2008.
That's in preparation for any potential damages from the drought in 2008. So in September, when the department requested the 1.2, that was to replenish the governor's emergency fund just to cover what we kind of started the fiscal year in the hole with the wildfires and the tornadoes. The 2.8 that the governor added in his recommendation was after the September budget submissions from GEMA, and forestry. But that 2.8, of course, a lot developed over the fall as it relates to the water crisis and the drought. So it was later on in the fall that we realized that we probably need to take some precautions for the drought in the emergency fund as well. So that's why you didn't see it in the agency request itself, but in the governor's recommendation.
May I follow up? What type of drought-related expenses would you have?
There's twofold, and I'll ask GEMA to answer more specifically. There's two components. One would be for the state match for any if we declare federal disaster, and the other impact. Let me pull this up. And the other would be any drought relief efforts, whether it be interconnectivity or new wells or water. And this projection came from GEMA, so if you have any more specific questions.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Chair Mills.
What is the definition of what qualifies for a state emergency to be funded?
Technically, the governor would have the discretion to choose whatever he wants, but he's chosen it's a discretionary fund, but he's chosen to use it exclusively for emergencies. He's defined that in the past as natural disasters, so you've seen him use it exclusively on things like tornadoes, the fires, floods, those types of things.
So that none of this is ever used for like police cars in a city or
not under this governor's
fire
administration.
truck.
Okay. Any other questions? I will ask you this. You did say it was at his discretion, and previously, I don't know if it was ever actually in anything formal or not, but of course, while I had been here before Governor Perdue, I think it had always been referred to as discretionary fund.
That's right.
And this does raise the question of what, the governor says it's an emergency fund, but it does raise a question. He's the one who decides what's an emergency, and especially with drought-related issues, what's an emergency to him, or what is not an emergency to him may be an emergency to a community. Do you know, is the amount of money in this fund that he calls the emergency fund, is this basically the same amount, or is it kind of parallel what was put in that fund before he was governor?
I'm under the impression, and I would have to take a look for you and would certainly get back to you, but I'm under the impression this has been pretty consistently around the 3.4 range, 3.4 million range is the balance year to year. But I would want to double check preceding this administration to check on that.
Okay. Well, I mean, none of us would want we appreciate what the governor's trying to do. If it was about the same before, and previous governors used it more as a discretionary fund, and I know that sometimes funds were allocated to communities for different projects, and if they were able to do that and take care of the emergencies, it would seem that the same amount of money could do the same thing with Governor Perdue. So I'm just a little confused about that. Any other questions? Well, we appreciate you coming today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, next up we have Department of Administrative Services. Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. We appreciate you coming today. We're just looking today at the amended 2008 budget. And do you have a copy of the tracking sheet?
Yes, sir. I'm
Tell us
referring
what page you're
to
on.
page 9 of 22.
Page 9. And anything that you want to talk to us about on the tracking sheet, or anything you want to tell us about your agency, we would appreciate it. And then members may have questions or comments. So.
Yes, sir. The one figure here on the tracking sheet in question is the $300,000 reduction for OSA, and Judge Oakley is here. She could answer any questions about that. That is a change that is regarding personal services within the administrative hearings group, and I don't know if there are any questions on that. I did have two other topics regarding DOAS proper, if I may. We wanted to raise the issue of the cut that was made by the Senate Budget Office to the DOAS Administration Division, which amounted to a $1.2 million cut. It seemed to be somewhat of a misplaced cut in that it was originally intended to be associated with the Risk Management Division of DOAS, but yet the cut occurred within the Administration Division. The thought was that the Risk Management Division, when they were using the Law Department, was not reimbursing the Law Department for the use of those lawyers, when in fact we had been reimbursing the Law Department. As you know, you and I have had that discussion in the past. We have thus endured a $1.2 million cut in the Administration Division, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Risk Management Division. So not only do we continue to reimburse the Law Department, but we've got a cut in a division that's unrelated, and we've held off on some key hires and in fact are going to run out of money here before the end of the fiscal year, which is going to affect our budget division, our accounting division, and our IT division. The current amount of money as to our latest estimate is approximately $880,000 that it would take to restore the funds due to timing and us delaying key hires as a part of the various transformations that are underway in DOAS. We've been able to shave about $320,000 off the 1.2, but now we're sort of getting down to cases, if you will, and the estimate's $880,000 to keep us solvent, if you will, in that division. The next point concerns House Bill 102, if I'm not mistaken. Charles, is that correct? House Resolution 102. This is concerning the annuity for Robert Clark, who we all recall, I'm sure, was one of the inmates who was freed due to some of the latest DNA testing. And the state had ordered that an annuity be cut to Mr. Clark. We had gone out in our Risk Management Division to the marketplace and obtained estimates from the various carriers for the annuity and had provided those back. Again, the Senate Budget Office cut that amount by $60,000. And obviously, as we know this week, the financial markets have been in quite a state of flux in the past year. And so at that point, what was $60,000 is now surely higher than that, probably not more than $100,000, but somewhere in between. So we are unable to buy the full amount of the annuity that was ordered by the legislature.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay. We have questions from members. Chairman Mills.
Could you elaborate on that? The legislature instructed you to buy an annuity,
Yes, sir.
but there was not enough money to buy the annuity.
That's correct. We had provided estimates from the marketplace as what it would take to book the annuity, if you will, and the funds were shorted by $60,000 according to the best estimate that we had.
And how were the funds short?
The amount of money it would take to buy the annuity in the financial marketplace was decreased by $60,000 below the best estimate.
I don't understand. Was there not enough money appropriated by the General Assembly, or was it reshuffled somewhere else?
No, sir, there was not enough money. The Senate Budget Office claimed that they had their own quotes, but yet they've been either unwilling or unable to produce their quotes.
Let me try. I don't know that I can clarify this. I'll give you my understanding of it, maybe, and I may be confused about it.
Please.
I mean, this is the number that came out of that we voted on the budget at the end of the year, and it was the result of the conference committee getting together. This was the result of their report. I mean, the input apparently you're saying came from the Senate and their budget office. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But I mean, the bottom line is, whether it was the Senate or the House, it was still this was the appropriations bill that we all voted on. So, I mean, apparently, if everything's correct, it was something that was initiated in the Senate based on some information they had, but when we vote on the bill, which is a result, the final vote we make is a result of the conference committee report. We all still agreed to it, so I just want to make sure that
You're correct.
we don't try to shift the blame over on somebody else or another body, since we all did vote on it.
So where do we go from here is my question.
We need to either have the money restored, Representative Mills, or we'll be able to buy an annuity at the money that we have, which will then short Mr. Clark.
So has he not been given anything at this point?
He has. The structure was that there was an upfront payment, but then there's an annuity over time. And so I believe that initial payment, Charles, if I'm not incorrect, has been paid.
Yeah, there's actually 3 payments included in this in-house resolution. We've made 2 of the payments. We've set up 1 cash payment and $100,000. Is that right? And we've set up an annuity for $200,000 for medical benefits for him. And there's an additional annuity for $900,000 to be paid out over 15 years. For the funds that were actually appropriated to us, we were able to make the first 2 payments, but there's insufficient funds to make the final annuity payment. So right now, we don't have enough in receipts to buy the $900,000 annuity.
Any other questions on this?
I got some other questions, but not related to this.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm trying to think this thing through, and I know we talked about this before, and I had some thoughts about it later. And I guess the first thought, I'm trying to recollect but the first thought is, why didn't the governor not recommend? Why didn't he not make recommendations in here in his amended budget to cover these 2 items that you're talking about? I mean, did you all request those? And was there any communication back from the governor's office about why he thought that the money shouldn't go in there for those 2 items?
We have had the discussion with the governor's office. The governor's office feeling is that this is the SBO created this issue. The SBO needs to repair this issue.
Well, I really.
It puts us in a difficult spot.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't
because we've been
directed to
shorted
you,
the money
but-
based on hard quotes from the marketplace, and the experts in this field reside in the risk management division, and they've produced the documentation that backs up their position, and yet, quite honestly, it appears as if someone's trying to almost game the system, and there's no gaming going on. The quotes are the quotes,
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that the market conditions have worsened.
Well, it may or may not be. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking or what kind of information. But the bottom line here again, I don't mean anything negative towards you, but if the governor doesn't recommend this money, and yes, the legislature then, as this thing moves to the House and the Senate, could make changes and get money over there. But the only way that we could do that then would be to take money from some place where he did. Is either recommended it before or is recommended, in fact, recommended in this document. I mean, yeah, we can make corrections for it, but it's like cutting off his nose to spite his face, because the money would have to come from something else that was one of his priorities. So I just have a hard time. I have a hard time understanding that. So, but with that said, are there any other questions? You said you had another question, right? Okay.
Mr. Commissioner, I wanted to ask you about yesterday in the joint appropriations. We were talking about the P cards. I believe it was yesterday.
Yeah, 2 days ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry, lose track of time. And the question was asked, how much money came in as profit from the P cards? How much was that?
The rebate associated with the P card contract in the last full fiscal year was $4.99 million.
$4.99 million. That's what came back to DOAS as operating the P cards.
Yes.
And on a separate issue, I know that you and I have talked in the past about the prison commissaries and how that the DOS made the decision to go from small businesses to servicing our prison commissaries to bidding it out. And I think there was the state was divided up in regions. Originally it was one. I think somebody won the bid, and then that was pulled back. And then it was just decided to divide the state up into several regions. What, 5, 4, 5, 6, I forget.
4 regions.
4 regions, and then the bids, whoever won those bids get to service all the prisons and the commissaries. Just in case committee doesn't, I'm sure everybody does know, but just want to remind, these are small businesses that sell their goods such as bread, sweet cake rolls, etc., to the prison commissaries, and then they sell them to the prisoners. And what happened when we went to the bid, and I raised this objection with the commissioner at this point, matter of fact, had 70 plus state representatives and senators sign on to my letter asking you to reconsider this, because we felt like you were moving from, that business was going to be taken from the small businesses and given to 4 big businesses, in essence cutting a lot of our constituents out of business and moving it to just 4 businesses. And after, I know we met, I forget, once or twice, and we had several conversations, people under you I spoke with, and in the end you decided to go ahead and move forward with this anyway, even though the Speaker Pro Tem, the Majority Leader, the Chairman of the State Institutions in the House, the Chairman of the Property and State Institutions in the Senate, along with 60 plus other representatives and senators, ask you not to. And I want the committee to be aware of that, and I'd like to ask you, how much savings did you or is the department anticipating from going to this bid process?
First of all, sir, to complete the story, if you will, 4 small businesses won the bid.
4 versus how many in the past had been servicing our prison commissaries?
There have been over 200 contractual and supplier relationships estimated by corrections for the 60-plus facilities that they operate. And so they've been tasked with trying to manage those 200 different contractual or supplier relationships.
So 190-something small businesses now don't have that business, but 4 do now.
4 businesses came together, formed a consortium, and they actually won all 4 regions through the competitive process.
Right. And so what is the anticipated savings going to that?
The anticipated savings, depending upon what corrections chooses to do in their process, and what I mean by that is they actually have 3 choices ahead for them. They can change their bylaws to adjust the profit margin that they're making off the products that are sold to the inmates. That's one option, to reflect the lower pricing that was gained through the competitive process. They could lower the product pricing to the inmates, reflecting the new product pricing and leaving the current profit margin in place, or they could do a hybrid of both those options, where they lower it somewhat, but perhaps not all the way. And the commissioner and his deputy have told us that what they're looking to do is to be able to build programs that will help focus on lower recidivism rates and not have to come back to the legislature for additional appropriations to do that. And this latest procurement, based on the best data that we have, shows slightly over $3 million in savings on an annual basis.
How do you say that is a $3 million in savings when that is paid for by the prisoners and their families? So the taxpayers are really not saving any money here, right? Because
No,
taxpayer dollars were not used to purchase those commissary products anyway. It was the prisoners and their families.
No, sir, that's incorrect. The inmates' families, for the most part, are Georgia residents, and the inmates' families are the ones who provide the money to the inmates under limits set by corrections. So it has a direct impact on Georgians. Secondly, if corrections can accomplish their mission of putting in these programs, drug prevention, drug abstention programs to lower the recidivism rate, that has a direct effect on Georgia and a very positive effect on Georgia. The savings stem from what was being paid to all those vendors that I listed, the 200 some odd vendors, the vast majority of which had never been competed. And so comparing those prices on average that had been paid to the new contract. We actually had in the past 2 prison facilities located right down the road from one another buying from the same supplier but yet paying different prices for the same goods. I mean, that's one thing that was cleaned up with this.
Right, but if you're saving $3 million, that's and I understand that's a best guess estimate at this point. If you're saving $3 million, but yet your budget request is still the same, you profited $4.99 million from the P cards.
Well,
That's a
sir,
total. Can I finish the question? That's a total of $7.99 million, and yet, as I look at the supplemental, it's a reduction for $300,000. And if you really want to save taxpayers money, it would seem that when we make a profit, then we would reduce our budget to reflect. And that was sort of how this committee was pitched with the whole New Georgia idea, that we were going to learn how to do business as a government. We were going to save money. We're all for that. But if you come back with the same amount of budget requests and even more each year, then I don't see where the savings at.
Well, sir, these are not DOAS funds. So it's apples and oranges that you're comparing.
Okay, I guess I don't understand then. Well, these are not DOAS funds.
No, sir, they're not. We did this procurement as the state purchasing division. We did this procurement on behalf of corrections because the $16 million far exceeds their delegated purchasing authority.
Oh, so it should be corrections that should cut the $3 million.
No, sir.
Since they've had a savings.
No, sir, you're incorrect. And that would be a question for corrections to answer. But it's not corrections.
Where am I incorrect at?
Well, sir, it's not corrections funds either.
Oh, whose is it?
Again, you described it earlier. It's the inmates who are paying for the goods.
What now?
They're buying the products, sir, as they go to the convenience store in the prisons.
I know I'm not the brightest bulb in the bunch, but something's not adding up here. Somebody, if you're saving $3 million by going to the bid process that you went to, it was costing, whoever you want to say, it was costing $3 million more. Who is that savings going to?
It depends on what corrections wants to do as a result of the procurement.
Well, it sounds to me like then Department of Corrections is the one that will be benefiting. I'm trying to get the answer out. Is that right? Is that the one that will be saving the $3 million, Department of Corrections?
Potentially the state of Georgia may be saving the $3 million if the legislature agrees that the programs that corrections wants to put in are viable, but yet they don't have to ask for additional appropriations.
Okay.
I'm done.
Thank you. Let's see, 27. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I guess as a follow-up to Chairman Mills then, because this is really coming out of inmates' fund, and these are not necessities. I mean, let's face it, the prison system provides them with the 3 squares a day. So these items they're buying are really luxuries, cigarettes, candies, etc. Might be considered luxuries in there. So they're not critical items that have to be purchased by the inmate in order to sustain their living. So the inmates saving that $3 million is at the cost of 190 companies approximately losing their contracts. If, say, 1 employee per company lost their jobs, we have saving a slight amount per inmate in convenience of luxury items at the cost of perhaps 190 jobs throughout the state of Georgia, the taxpayers, I would say that's a net loss. And that's just an observation, but I would say that's a net loss to the state of Georgia for anybody to lose their job, whether it's one person, 190, or some number in between, when the counterbalancing is not a savings, a outright savings to the state of $1 million, $3 million, or $5 million. It's a reduction in costs, and like you said, the consideration is not to whether to take that extra money and offset some other part of the Department of Corrections budget, but actually to perhaps lower the cost of the products to the inmates to provide them luxuries at a lower cost. I just cannot say where an inmate getting a savings on luxury is worth the cost of one job, of one employee in the state of Georgia. And that's just a comment to follow up to Chairman Mills.
Sir, if I may follow up to that comment.
Sure.
First of all, the four companies who formed a consortium and ultimately won all four regions previously had about $9 million of the $16 million business. And so, while there's no guarantee that anybody lost their job anywhere in the state over this, because obviously what that means is that it was very, very fragmented pieces of business that anybody had. When you take account of the fact that there was 196 other businesses fighting over the small scraps that were left. So these four companies, though, they came under a competitive process which made their pricing much more uniform. And again, I'll reiterate, it gives the Corrections Department numerous options, the three that I outlined earlier, to either offset some program that they've got going on now, augment it. It would require a change in their bylaws, and obviously they can address that directly with you when you meet with them, to change the current profit margin, as I understand it, that's being made on the items being sold.
Okay, I want to ask you, and I apologize, I could not make the hearings, I guess, yesterday or the day before when you appeared before the joint committee, and I know that from reading in the paper different things, you've been asked some questions about this, and Chairman Mills had asked you a question about it. But apparently some funds that do come back to DOS, if I'm not misunderstanding this, is I think you just said the $4.99 million, that may be wrong, the fee that DOS gets, or the state of Georgia gets, for the P cards being handled through the Bank of America.
Yes.
Now, is that correct?
Yes.
And you may have already answered this question or these questions, but I want to make sure before this subcommittee, since this is the subcommittee that reviews this part of the budget. Now, does that money come back to DOAS? Is that where it comes to?
Yes, sir.
Well, then, first of all, that would be more than enough to take care of Mr. Clark and other things. But where's this money show up at?
This money is being used to fund the e-procurement implementation, which is about a $20 million implementation as a part of the procurement transformation.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand this. I know I'm running a few minutes late here, but I need to understand this. Funds the e-procurement transformation?
The e-procurement system implementation. There's not a purchasing system within the state, and so we need to create one.
But we funded money. There was money that I know that we helped fund in this subcommittee for that.
There was some initial funding. I believe it was about $1 million. Is that correct?
Well, see, I apologize, but I don't ever remember, and we've asked a lot of questions, I don't remember anybody ever saying when we were discussing these issues that in addition to this $1 million or whatever many billions of dollars it was, we're also going to get this much money back from Bank of America for them handling this process. Does anybody here remember that?
Well, sir, there's code on the books that allows DOAS to take administrative fees and rebates from the contracts that we're implementing on a statewide basis and be able to fund part of the operation with those monies.
And I don't question that, but through the appropriations process, I would have thought that I don't recall if you were there or not. I just don't remember. But it would seem like that's what this is all about, knowing where the money is so we can appropriate it properly. Somebody comes up and says, somebody asked me, as the chairman of the subcommittee, do you know that DOS is getting, I didn't know it was $4.99 million, but they're getting so many millions of dollars back from Bank of America, kind of like a toaster or something like that. If you open up some kind of account with a bank, only it's a whole lot bigger than a toaster. And I say, well, no, I didn't know that. Well, you should have known it, Don Parsons. You're the chairman of that subcommittee. And how am I going to know it if somebody doesn't bring that to us? Why? So how does that? I want to make sure I understand this. So there is in Georgia code, it says that you can use that money. It says that you can use that money to help fund that system. Or I mean, is there some way that it's in Georgia code that money that you get back from Bank of America is used for that? Is there and that's in law? It's written that it can't be that we can't get that money and use it for something we think like perhaps fund Mr. Clark, who the General Assembly and the governor signed the resolution that he would get X amount of money?
Sir, the code that's on the books does not specify the use of it. It says that DOS is able to retain that money. Joe, did you want to speak to the particular section of code?
I'm joking.
Well, please do. This is a serious matter, and I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to be able to answer questions, and every member of this subcommittee wants to be able to answer those questions when somebody asks them that.
I'm Joe Kim with the Director of Legal Services for DOS. The code does authorize DOS to charge administrative fees for contracts, for supply contracts that are administered by the DOS, but it's for purposes of state purchasing. So the e-procurement system would be one part of state purchasing. It could also be used for another part of state purchasing, but it is limited to the state purchasing function, so we can't use the P-card rebate fees to try and supplement something outside of the purchasing area like the ability for Mr. Clark.
Okay, and I apologize for jumping up and down. I really do. I never want to do that. But it is a serious issue. It's a lot of money, and I appreciate you trying to answer. We do have a question.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up on that, because sometimes I'm confused too, and perhaps I'm easily confused. As we went through the Commission for New Georgia, the net concept of the Commission to New Georgia, as was explained to us as legislators, is we were going to start doing business as a business. And we were going to take some of these functions that have been spread all over in various bureaucracies, various departments, and consolidate them because there would be a net savings to the state. And what I'm trying to figure out is how, and I think it's perhaps what the chairman is asking, is where can we look at, and we're asking for assistance in pulling together and say, okay, we're now doing this, we're going into one more year. If we pull all these little savings that have been from this department and that department, we put them together, added in with the rebates, have we in fact saved dollars to the states, or are we just moving one bureaucracy to another and creating another bureaucracy? Is this in fact doing its intended purpose of saving the taxpayers of the state of Georgia money? And I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I just don't think that we have the capabilities as this committee or any one committee of analyzing that, because it's spread all over the place. Where might we be able to find that answer, and who might be able to pull all that together and find that? Not to the penny, but in some good round numbers, because I'm very confused.
Well, sir, in the last session, various contracts had been statewide contracts had been renegotiated, and in the vast majority of those cases, those savings were reported. My understanding is that the vast majority of the agencies took the appropriate cuts according to those savings that were touted. One of the major efforts that are underway currently is to implement this e-procurement system, which is going to streamline the procurement process, which should free up some additional savings, quite a bit of additional savings, because today it's a very manual, very laborious process, and just making sure that when statewide contracts are put in place that they're used throughout the state so that the state is fully leveraged is quite a challenge, as you might imagine, in a very decentralized enterprise like we have here in the state.
Sure, but if we're trying to keep score, and as it's been said, if not, we're just practicing, who is the scorekeeper for this entire process to find out, is there a net savings? Because, yes, and certainly, you've done a good job in putting together this joint procurement, but if we're paying for the cost of this implementation and that implementation, are we in fact reducing jobs over in this department to put in new people and purchasing here. But when it's boiled down, is there anyone within the state that is keeping score to say at the end of the day, each and every year, and I realize it's an ongoing process, that we will be able to see what our savings in fact are, or what our lower expenditures, which may not be a savings because we realize the budget's growing.
Right.
But is there somebody keeping that score? And if so, who might that be?
For the transformations that are ongoing within DOES, we're putting in measures to do as much of that as possible on a global enterprise basis across all the CNG initiatives. The Governor's Office of Implementation is doing their best to track across all the various task forces that were put in place.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Chairman O'Neill has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you know, Commissioner, if the vendor in the P card scenario pays a discount like they do in a traditional credit card scenario?
I'm sorry, pays a discount.
A typical credit card transaction, and I'm trying to associate that with a P card transaction.
Yes, sir.
Is a tip like American Express is 4%. The vendor pays. Other MasterCards are 3%. Yeah.
The interchange fee. Yes, any vendor who accepts the P card or any other credit card pays an interchange fee to the bank whose P card is being utilized.
So
obviously, that interchange fee is in return for getting paid, typically in a 48-hour pay cycle from the bank, thereby assuring payment, which has a very positive financial impact to the vendor in terms of not having to float the money out to the buyer and hoping that they pay within standard 30-day or 45-day terms.
I understand that, but your I guess credit here is the highest bonded rating that you can have is the state of Georgia. So I understand in a traditional credit card scenario, it's a cost sustained to I guess take risk, and to some extent to create float, I guess, to the favor of working capital to vendor. But with the state being the debtor, I mean, there's not a lot of risk in payment. I wouldn't think, given our rating. So isn't this, what would you call it? What kind of fee?
It's an interchange fee.
Interchange fee, just an additional tax on business, and to get us a kickback so that we don't see the funds appropriated?
No, sir. Understand that just as with your own credit card, should you carry one, that if you're making purchases from the 1st to the 30th of the month, that bill's typically not due until the 30th of the following month. So there's a very positive float for the state as well. And the vendors, there's not a different price that they charge, whether the state sends them a check directly through the very laborious process of issuing a manual purchase order and having the supplier invoice them. There's not a difference in the charge that they charge the state, whether it's paid with a credit card or through a purchase order.
That's what I meant by the float issue. If you take the risk side out of it, the float is that. But I would respectfully submit to you 3% for 30 days is an APR in the 20s. Most vendors obviously can finance capital for a lot less than that in the traditional banking scenario. I don't know if they had the choice, if that was a last-end choice, but it just looks a little sinister to me as an old plotting accountant to be getting money back at the expense of the business community and not really calling it what it is kind of an additional tax on business is what it looks like to me.
Well, the amount coming back to the state has no bearing on the interchange fee.
I would respectfully differ. I don't know where else that Citibank's going to come up with $4.9 million if it's not their income stream.
They are able to create profit over and above that based on the float that they're getting, but they, as with any supplier that signs up with the state, once they go through the competitive process, they have access to the market that is the state of Georgia. And otherwise, they don't.
Chairman Mills has another question.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know we're asking you a lot of questions.
problem.
And I guess what would be helpful for me, if DOAS administers all the procurement programs for other agencies, maybe not all of them, but quite a few, would it be possible for you to produce for me a summary sheet of how much you've saved each agency or department by going to the procurement program or the New Georgia program? How much have we saved the Department of Corrections? How much have we saved whatever department you've helped? Because that's something we've never seen. We were pitched and told there would be a huge savings, and it was presented as it was going to save taxpayers dollars. And if it just saves on the purchase side but doesn't ever reflect any changes in the upcoming budget, then as a committee, I don't want to speak for the committee, but we don't see a savings in that. And so I'd like to see, do you have some sort of a summary sheet, or do I need to go somewhere else? Where can I get a summary sheet of the savings that have been compiled?
Where we have the savings, we have produced those, i.e. the comment I made earlier for the last session. In some cases, some of the areas that we're reaching into now, i.e. If I can refer back to commissaries, or in some of the other areas where competitive bidding has never been administered, or the central office of an agency doesn't even have copies of the contracts that were let at the local level by the local offices, getting our hands on what the state has paid in the past has been an impossible mission. Knowing that the state doesn't require all agencies to be on PeopleSoft, there is no data warehouse of pricing that the state pays for given commodity items. Our best sources of who the state is buying from is to go out to the community and ask the suppliers, are you selling anything to the state? And that's been the very rudimentary way that we've had to step into this enterprise and try to assess what the spend has been. So it's been very much a puzzle, and we'll provide to you what we have, but just know up front that it's extremely incomplete out of necessity in the world that we live in here in the state of Georgia.
I can understand the difficulty in forecasting that. What would be a fair time for me to expect to get some sort of a summary sheet on that? As you know, we're in the budget process now.
We should be able to produce something for you in the next few days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you for coming and answering questions. I know you've answered, or some of these issues have been addressed now in public hearings now by you at least a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, I believe. So I appreciate you coming and be willing to try to answer these questions for us. What I think might be a good idea is for those of us on the subcommittee who have further questions, who don't feel like, not that you haven't tried, but to us the questions haven't been answered fully to us, or we don't understand the answers that you've given us, I guess. I think that we'll get together and maybe ask you to come in for a meeting with us, maybe, and
sure.
And then if another public hearing is necessary, then we might do that too. To ask you to come, we do appreciate it. But there are questions, and I hope you can understand that we and we're charged to look after this money, obviously, and to make sure that taxpayers' money is appropriated properly, and it's properly accounted for too. And I'm certainly not saying that that's not the case. We just need to understand where it's at, how it gets there, and maybe in some cases it needs to be someplace else, or maybe there needs to be some legislation passed that would change some of these statutes that you had referred to. I don't know how long that has been. I'm not sure how long the statutes you referred to have been in place. If it's something we've done, maybe we voted for it. I don't know over the last couple of years, but it's something we may need to look at. But it's just something that we'll be calling on you again, and I hope that you'll be willing to come and discuss it with us. And we do appreciate you coming today. Thank you, sir. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I know we're running behind now. Georgia Building Authority, I think, is up next.
Mr. Chairman, we have no requests in FY08.
Okay.
We're ready to talk about anything.
If you'll come up just for 1 minute. I'll see you in a minute.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to ask, you are from the building authority?
Yes, sir.
And state your name,
Clark.
please.
Kevin Clark.
The only thing I wanted to ask you, and it does relate to appropriations. It's a little bit off the wall, I guess. But we've had several of our aides and interns who have told us, and my own intern, she called right after I started the meeting, and I almost know what she was calling about, and that is that they've said that they're having a hard time getting into the
archives parking lot
over
yes,
there.
Yes, sir. We've started communications again with the contractor and the city of Atlanta to clear up the street and see what we can do to get that remedied.
Okay. I mean, something might get cleared up fairly soon, or?
It is certainly my intention to get it cleared up
Okay.
as quickly as possible. Yes, sir.
I mean, I know it's something that y'all didn't intend to happen, but somehow or another, because I know this particular aide worked for me several years ago. It happened for a few years, but I know that it used to be, I'm pretty lenient on these people coming in whenever I need them, not at a certain time. So sometimes they come in later in the day, never had a problem parking before, but now sometimes. I know the other day she said that they told her that she was the last one, that there was only one parking place left, but we've also had some come in and tell us they couldn't park and stuff. So I appreciate that.
Oh, yes, sir. Well, the problem we were having today was related to that construction going on right next door.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions. If you
Okay.
could hold just for a second.
Sure.
I think the first question, response to parking lot. Can you furnish me a boat for the parking area over there in the number one capital? That thing, I don't know what's happened, but it's a lake, and I have to wade through it to get out.
We will get that drained. We'll get that taken care of.
Thank
sir.
you. 22.
Mr. Commissioner, for the last 16 years, I guess, I've been concerned about parking. The size of the parking spaces, and I understand we're fixing to do something with the building next door to us here. Hopefully we'll do it.
Yes, sir.
But right now, in the number one parking lot, it's so congested until the area where I park, there are pickup trucks and SUVs there. And people are having to park across the line in order to get out of the unit there. Is there any way that we could make some type of concession for the SUVs, the pickup trucks and things like this to have an area where the parking space is a little bit wider?
Yes, sir. I think we could. We'd have to let me look at that and see. I know that the spaces in number one are very congested, and it's very difficult to get in and out of. But let me look at that, and I'll see what I can do with that. Yes, sir.
How soon will we have an answer on that, sir?
I should have something for you middle of the week.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay. And I know the question was asked a moment ago about the secretaries. Is there sufficient parking for all of our secretaries to have a parking space?
Between Pete Hackney, Butler Street, and our archives parking, currently, yes, sir, there is.
So my personal secretary, which right now doesn't have a parking space, she just called your office.
Yeah, if she comes to our parking office, we will get her a parking spot.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
I appreciate you coming forward. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Next on the agenda is the Georgia Technology Authority. Huh? Yeah. Anyone here from? There we are. Huh?
Patrick Moore with the Georgia Technology Authority. We have no requests in the amended 08 budget, but we're happy to answer any questions or talk about our current budget. Any questions y'all might have.
Okay. Any questions for the committee? You're off the hook.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Workers' comp. Good morning, Ms. Carolyn.
Good morning, sir. It's good to be here. We're on page 21 of the sheet, but we have no requests either for the amended budget. I will add that, as we talked to this committee before, our budget is covered by assessments that we make on the insurance carriers and self-insured employers in Georgia. So wherever our budget is set, we assess that money on them, pay it to Treasury, and then draw down to meet our needs. So.
Thank you. Any questions? Everybody's getting
All right.
good news this morning.
Okay, well, welcome back. It's good to
Thank-
see everyone, and have a good session.
Thank you very much. Okay, veteran service.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, it's good to see old friends out there that I've known for many years, and I appreciate everything you've done from the Department of Veterans Service and the Veterans of Georgia. We're getting back a lot of veterans now these days, and more than any war, we're having more problems. They are having more problems for us to help solve, and we are solving a lot of them all over the state. We want to thank you for everything you've done, and we are supporting the governor's recommendation that he has made. And before I tell you about that, I'll tell you I heard him discussing the P cards and all that. We don't have any credit cards in our department. Never have and never will unless we're ordered by you to do it.
That's good to know.
I'll also tell you that I've never had an automobile since I've been here, and I've been here longer than anybody else. But I figure I can drive my own. And we appreciate all you do and continue to do. I'd like to ask Lynn Glass, our Assistant Administrator, Commissioner for Administration, to give you any greater detail you want to know about what the governor has approved. And we stand that he made the right decision, we feel, and we agree with it. Lynn, would you come up?
Commissioner, it's always good to have you here, and enjoyed working with you, and we go back a long way, and you do an outstanding job with the veterans.
Your daddy was here.
That's a long time. Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
We have one item for consideration in the current year amended budget, and that's actually section 47. I believe it's on page 20 of the tracking sheet. It calls for an additional $924,000 to replace the chilling tower, or the cooling tower and chiller, which is a major component of the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system in the domiciliary building at the Georgia War Veterans Home in Milledgeville. This is a totally unanticipated requirement for us, and first came to our attention last summer during that extended period of unusually hot weather that we had throughout the state back in late August and during the month of September. During that time, in Milledgeville anyway, outside air temperatures were consistently at or above 100 degrees, and the existing cooling tower in the domiciliary building could not keep the chilled water at the required design levels to maintain acceptable temperatures in the patient rooms, offices, and common areas of the building. Patient well-being, especially for those with breathing problems, requires a cool environment inside the building where they live, at a summer range of 72 to 75 degrees, while the existing system was only able to bring that temperature down to 85 to 90 degrees last summer during the peak demand temperature days. That system that we have in place now, the existing cooling tower and chiller, was installed back in the early 90s. It uses outdated absorption technology that requires continual maintenance by maintenance staff, and is frankly beginning to rust rather badly right now. We consider this to be an emergency funding requirement, as the existing equipment, that equipment that's on the ground now, has failed to meet the cooling demand with temperatures above 90 degrees, which has caused emergency interventions for patient care to include patient relocations outside the building, and therefore placing health and safety issues at risk. We would like to have the new cooling tower installed and running prior to the arrival of the hot weather months next summer. However, we've been advised that there will be a 12 to 13 week delivery time in order to get the equipment on the ground from the time that it's ordered, and then there will be another 2 to 3 weeks once it does arrive for installation. And that's really the driving force behind our asking for the support for this particular equipment in the amended budget, rather than waiting through completion of the big budget process. Once installed, the new chiller will, in addition to fixing the cooling problem, actually be more efficient by reducing the high temperature water consumption that's required for the equipment, by reducing domestic makeup water consumption, by reducing maintenance and operating costs and improving facility, energy management, and code compliance. This project, as Mr. Wheeler mentioned, is being supported by the governor and his recommendations. In anticipation of going forward, efforts are already underway to have the project designed and ready for award immediately following passage of the current year amended budget. I've prepared a fact sheet on this for each of you to take with you. And as always, your support in making this happen will be very much appreciated. Okay. That concludes my comments. If I have any questions.
Question?
Thank you very much.
I believe we certainly appreciate how important good cooling is, particularly in these hot summer months. Based on your last comments about the efficiencies and everything that would be achieved by the new unit, will we be able to reduce any costs from the 09 budget by the fact of having this actually installed with the reduced operating costs and all? Will that be impacting the 09 budget at all?
I would think that I would think they would have to. There would be a savings in the cost of operation because of the maintenance that's required to keep the existing equipment running today. I would think there would be some savings. Now, I couldn't hazard a guess to tell you exactly what that would be. I would think we would probably have to have the equipment installed on the ground. Let's go through the summer months and see how well it does do and what kind of a savings there is. And I could better address that next fall during the budget process then at that point, I think.
Very good. Well, this department does a wonderful job with every single penny they get their hands on, so hopefully those savings can go right to the benefit of some of our veterans. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
I think we'll take care of our veterans, and I don't see any problem with this thing, and appreciate you coming forward and appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Next, the Department of Audits. Mr. Russell.
Morning.
Good morning.
We don't have a request, but we'll be glad to answer any questions that y'all may have. About
Can't believe everybody's come with no requests this morning. Always good news. Worries us a little bit. Any questions from Mr. Hinton? Russell, I believe you covered the waterfront.
Okay, well, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Banking and Finance. I think so. You're right. Thank you.
Good morning. Raise this up just a hair. Just a little handout there that Tracy Whiteside, our new Deputy Commissioner for Administration, handed out. Page 1, of course, is just our mission and vision and motto statement. And page 2 shows our program outline. Page 3, we do have a request, and I'm sorry to interrupt the string of good luck there that you had. We're asking, and the governor has recommended that $181,000 basically be restored to our budget for the operating costs of our phone system. It was taken out of last year's budget, and it's had a crippling effect on the department, to be honest with you. To use the analogy, I've told others, I said years ago we were on a hamburger diet, and then we went down to a hamburger helper type diet, and right now we're on ramen noodles and rice. We're in dire straits. We've had to hold open 4 examiner positions to try to fund to offset the reduction out of our budget this year. 3 bank examiner positions we've had to keep open, and 1 mortgage examiner position we've had to keep open. As well as what is very concerning to me is training. We've had to delay or, in some cases, just forego some training in some respects. Even the core training for our newer examiners, we've had to delay until after July 1st or till the restoration of these funds so we can fund that training. As well as we have eliminated basically our stay-out travel expense. Our examiners, we have districts located throughout the state. But still, even with them disseminated through the state, when they go to do an examination, many times it'll be 80, 90, sometimes 100 miles away or so. They would go to that town and stay there usually a week or so, week and a half to 2 weeks to do a bank examination. But because our budget has been so impacted, we have foregone any of those type stay-outs, and so it has impacted our examination schedule as well.
Are you saying then that the phone system, all these positions and responsibilities are dependent on this phone system?
Well, the lack of funds, the phone system we already have it, and so we have to pay for it to keep the phones working. And so to keep them working, we've had to take away expenses in other areas, such as eliminating travel and training.
Now that you've got the phone system, is these funds already allocated in the prior budget? I mean,
well, this is the ongoing cost of the phone system.
Okay.
We had already had, I guess, in the prior budget, the system to get it implemented, and this is the ongoing each year annual cost of the phone system.
That's cool. Okay.
Right. And on the next page, page 4, is simply we're asking for a reallocation of funds, and you'll see, we had the funds that were for the 3% salary adjustment and the 0.5% market adjustment, as well as the increase in employer share of state health benefit premiums. 83.5% of that money that was given for those items was allocated to our chartering program, which is only 4 people. It's our smallest program. And so 83% of the funds. So 4 people are very happy, but 118 are extremely upset, would be upset, obviously, because we need to disseminate that. For example, the supervision division, which is the banking and credit union examiners and the staff that oversees that, had 0% allocated for their salary adjustments and market adjustments and the employer share of the health benefit premiums. So we're asking just simply for a reallocation there.
Are these funds possibly as a result of some redirects in your department that should have been earmarked for one and maybe moved to another?
No, sir. No, sir.
So what was budgeted as far as what it's been used for? There's been no redirect?
That's right, correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Insurance. Getting through this thing in a hurry this morning. No request.
Sorry, we're starting a trend because we have one as well. Good morning. I'm Angie Newell, and Commissioner Oxendine could not be here this morning, so I'm here on his behalf to present the amended budget request as well as answer any questions you may have. We have one request, which is to restore funding for motor vehicles. In the 2008 budget, we requested a redistribution of funds to move funds from one program to another. However, in the House Bill 95 during conference committee, that was viewed as an increase rather than a redistribution, so that money was cut. And we're asking for that $28,000 to be restored. The current funding level of like $51,000 will only allow the department to replace 3 motor vehicles, whereas the previous funding level allowed the department to replace 5 motor vehicles. So we would really appreciate it if you would consider restoring that funding to our base for motor vehicles.
Have any questions for the committee? Okay.
The motor vehicles that you're talking about replacing, how many miles on those vehicles?
Actually, they exceed over 150,000 right now. So they are way over the criteria, which is 135,000.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can expand on that, we are replacing around 5 vehicles each year, but we really need to replace more than that because right now in our pool of 52, we have maybe 10 vehicles that meet and exceed that requirement of 135,000 miles.
Your fleet of vehicles that you have today, what type cars are they? Is any of them the super luxury cars?
No, they're all Ford
except
cars.
the one the commissioner drives, right?
He has a Crown Vic, and it's not a super. It's just a basic Crown Vic.
Right.
But no, the fleet includes Ford Tauruses, and I believe we have been purchasing Malibus lately. I think they're Chevy Malibus. Those are the 2 cars.
Thank you.
And we have 52 vehicles, if I didn't mention that.
The 135,000 mile recommended, who sets that number?
DOES.
That is by DOES. So I wonder, because I run a fleet of vehicles and we average closer to 300,000 miles on them. And it's something that we'll look into separately. Thank you.
Yeah, and can I just, in that same vein, we would like you to consider increasing our motor vehicle funding because of that. In your handout, I've included a spreadsheet, and it's exhibit number 3. And the first 2 pages represents what we're reimbursing for mileage for our field employees. As I mentioned, we have 52 vehicles in our fleet, but we have about 90 field employees, 30 of which are, driving their personal vehicles, and we are reimbursing them for mileage. And you can see the mileage reimbursements on the first 2 pages. And then the rest, the remaining 4 pages, the long spreadsheet, the very long spreadsheet. The last 4 pages represents what we're reimbursing for mileage and for the department.
Okay. How many vehicles does the insurance department do they have?
We have 52.
52.
But we have, almost 90 field employees.
Okay.
So if we would like to move at least 20 to 25 of those field employees from their personal vehicles to state vehicles, because the mileage reimbursement is very, very high. And we just think it would be fiscally responsible if we would do that.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Merit system. Do we have anyone here from the merit system? Well, that's easy. Well, according to this, we're at the point of a lunch break, and we may have to eat breakfast, but we got through this in a hurry, so I don't, unless there's someone here that unscheduled or just observers, then we'll take a break and reconvene at 1:30, or that's on the schedule, I guess. He said he would be back, but I'm not sure. We'd have to notify. Thank all of you for coming, and we'll reconvene sometime after lunch.
I haven't met you though. I'm Lisa.
Hey,
I'm the House
Lisa,
Budget
how
Analyst for General Government.
I didn't expect to be put in this position, but that's okay.
really kind of 4 different buckets that we're focusing in. And that is, the first one is comp and benefits. And I think probably y'all have heard some discussion about, the approach for compensation for state employees and how that's affecting us being able to attract and retain people. And, it's really about looking at our base pay, also looking at incentive pay for people, pay for performance. So that's really the first bucket on, how do we need to look and how do we need to focus our compensation and benefits for our employees. In addition to that, I think I talked last year a little bit about some of the new systems that's coming online, and one of those was performance management system, which, now state employees, they get a yearly evaluation that's done in a handwritten form as far as being able to sit down and tell somebody what kind of job they've done over the last year. We're going to an online system effective July that's going to make it much more efficient. It actually makes it very consistent across the state of the way people are evaluated. So that's one of the things we're doing. And then also from a flex benefit standpoint, what we're trying to look at is, we offer state health benefits that encompasses health insurance, that sort of thing. And then on the flip side of that, we have flexible benefits that our agency offers, and those are benefits that the state does not pay for, that it's all paid for by the employee. But what we found was most of those benefits, like life insurance, dental insurance, vision, most of those had not been bid out in 5 years. So we think there's an opportunity to go back and rebid all those and come in with a lower price for our employees, which hopefully will offset some of the increases that we know are going to happen over the next few years in health insurance, because everybody knows health insurance is going up. So if we can help balance some of that and offset some of those costs, that's really kind of what we're geared towards from the flex benefit side. The second piece of it is one of the things that I'm really excited about is in the State Personnel Administration Agency, we do most of the core training for the state. Now, we don't do specific training like at DOT. They do their own, individual training for DOT people, same way with DHR and those other agencies. But we do more executive leadership management type training. And for years, the facility that we conducted those training offerings was in Decatur. It was in a facility that was not owned by the state. We leased that facility in probably the last 10 or 15 years. We actually gave up the lease on that facility, and we moved all our training facilities to the 19th floor of the Floyd building, state-owned, and we think that it's a better opportunity. And it's a whole lot more convenient for state employees to go up there and get training, too. So revamped the whole training perspective. We had, and you've probably heard about the executive leadership program that we have, real high quality. It's done in coordination with the University of Georgia. And we've made the decision to align all of our management training with that executive leadership concept. So that's one of the things that's going to be taking place this next year. Actually, we started January of this year with that. The third bucket is probably a very important piece that I think that y'all are familiar with and interested in. And you've heard over the years that because we have so many agencies, we have a lot of inconsistency when it comes to state HR policy. And it's policies that can get us in a bind when it comes to legal issues, whether it's employment practices, pay practices, leave, absent management. A lot of those policies are inconsistent. And one of the things that we've done over the last 12 months is go through with the agencies and look at specific policies where we need to be consistent across the state, where we're consistent from the perspective of we're not getting the state in trouble legally. So those are going to be rolled out this year. There's 22 policies that we determined that would apply across the board as far as the state is concerned. We looked at it 2 different ways. We wanted to make sure that we protected the state, but we didn't want to just roll out policies just for the sake of rolling out policies and tie those agency hands when it comes to the flexibility they need to run their organization. So it was kind of a balanced, check from that perspective. And the last piece of it is what we call strategic recruitment. If you go out and talk to the average citizen of the state of Georgia, typically you'll find that they have a hard time applying for jobs for the state. we do a great job when it comes to going out and selling our agencies, like the Department of Corrections. If you've seen their vans that have the covers on them, Department of Corrections .jobs, that sort of thing. I can talk about each of the agencies on how well they do that and how well they advertise in the state as far as being able to recruit people. What we don't do good is sell the state as a whole as an employer, because we feel like that. Whether you're coming right out of high school or technical school or college, or you're re-entering the workforce as a retiree, the state has a whole lot of opportunity for you. You can come on board in an entry-level job, and if you want to spend your whole career here, and you're productive, and you want to receive the training, and you have something to offer, you can actually stay your whole career here. And so we're wanting to sell that idea and really go out and sell Georgia as a best place to work in the state of Georgia. Why can't we be on that list of best employers in the state? So what we're proposing to do, and we have actually already started working in the direction, is to have a website where the typical Georgia citizen can come in and they can go to one web page and find out what openings are with the state of Georgia. And within that web page, it would direct you to specific agencies. For instance, if I was an individual and I was interested in a job in law enforcement, I could go to that web page and I could click on Department of Corrections, State Patrol, Georgia GBI, any of those, law enforcement related agencies, to find out what kind of opportunities are there. What do I need to look at as far as education experience to apply for one of those jobs. So that's really quickly. That was really kind of the four buckets that we're headed. We've got a lot of work going on in other areas, but those are kind of our focus for 08. And it's really the focus to be, number one, consistent in the state when it comes to HR policies, and also be centralized where we need that centralization to make sure that things are standardized, and that we have a group that's looking at, how does compensation across the state, how does it rate with private industry from a market perspective. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. To make sure I fully understand it, is now our personnel administration. Is it your agency that will be bidding out for health insurance in the future?
No, sir. That's the Department of Community Health.
Okay, it almost sounded like you were taking that over, and I was trying to.
Now,
are you going to have an input into the process?
We do have an input, because what we'd like to do is be able to. Department of Community Health owns the health care, and they do the bidding processes of going out and looking at who needs to offer those kind of opportunities for the state. But in addition to that, it kind of parallels what we offer, because we do offer dental insurance, vision insurance, life insurance, long-term, short-term disability, all those sort of things. That makes sense that we look and we work in conjunction with each other to make sure that we're not doing something that counteracts the other. So we do work hand in hand with Dr. Rhonda Mehta's group when it comes to DHC and what they're doing. In fact, we have ongoing talks with them right now as far as, from the perspective of bidding out, does it look like we need to do it jointly to try to get better rates for the state employees.
Okay, that was my question, because it almost sounded like you were taking that over. It's just trying to clarify it. Thank you.
Thank you.
What is your rental rates per square foot for your housing?
What's that?
What is your rental rates for your housing?
Y'all have that? You're talking about the rental rates we pay GBA?
Yes.
It varies depending on the floor, so we have to.
Yeah, it depends on square footage. We can get that to you. I know, the example that I gave, we had a facility out in Decatur that we didn't own. The state didn't own it. We brought that whole group into the state facility, and we're saving money as a result of that.
And that's what prompted my question and my concerns now. And you mentioned centralized. Would you consider moving your headquarters to the central part of the state, where square footage are much cheaper than it is in the Atlanta metro area?
Probably would be counterproductive to what we're trying to do, because The reason we moved our training facility across the street was because the majority of the employees of the state that use that training are right here in the Atlanta area. And the biggest piece of that is, folks that are here locally, and be much easier for the folks in the outlying areas to come here than it would be if we were out someplace else and the majority of the employees here in Atlanta had to go there. So, it made sense from the standpoint of bringing it all up here in Atlanta.
Thank you.
A couple of questions, and one is on the merit system. I know up to this point that the merit system, folks that come under it, about the only incentive they have is our annual pay raise or whatever comes along, and that is considered a merit increase or whatever, but it's really a cost of living increase. In this new system you're talking about, is there going to be provision in addition to the cost of living, a merit increase based on performance, and how is that going to work? Are you going to have to build something in the budget? How are you going to know what your anticipated promotion are you?
Right.
How is that going to work?
Well, and it really already started, because in the 08 budget last year that was passed, and that the increases that were effective January this year, there were 3 different buckets. There was the overall general increase, the one you were talking about that you described as a COLA increase. That was a 3% for state employees, and that was received January 1st of this year. The second piece was some jobs that we characterized as critical jobs. It was jobs that we looked at and proposed that we look at them individually, because it was jobs that we knew we were having trouble attracting and retaining. The specific answer to your question was the third bucket of that piece of the salary plan was for incentive pay. There was 0.5% in the budget for the agencies to use to pay for their high performers. And typically, and again, I've been here a year and I came from the private sector. Typically what we saw was the first year that you introduced that kind of incentive pay, people were not used to being able to apply that to your high performers, and typically you would get a situation where an agency would come back and say, 40% of my employees in this agency are high performers. Well, typically that's not the case, and you really want to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% of people receiving that extra money, because number one, if you give it to everybody, then it's not pay for performance, and because it was only 0.5%, that wasn't a whole lot of money if you spread it to a lot of people. If you narrowed it and you really looked at who was performing and who really did a good job in your agency, then it could be pretty dramatic as far as significance of the amount of money that you got. So, but we were real impressed because we wound up across the state, 16% of state employees received that 0.5%. So, that was a pretty big statement from the perspective of the first year you did it, and you went out and we worked with the agency heads to design plans on how you really recognize high potentials and high performers. So that was what was proposed and what was done for 08. The 09 plan year that y'all will be looking at and what the governor had presented was, it kind of mirrors the 08 plan. For 09, instead of it being a 3% increase across the board for what you call a cost of living, it's a 2.5%, but the incentive piece goes up from 0.5% to 1%. So it's really making a statement that we're really serious about this incentive piece, and people that are really performing, we need to recognize that and give them additional money for that. So, following the same lines of that compensation package.
Okay. I hope that the requirements to receive the eligibility requirements are uniform and consistent. I just wondered what is this going to raise any possibility of legal suits because they're being discriminated? They didn't get their merit, or not their merit, but their incentive
pay.
Yeah.
And of course, anytime you do that, you do open yourself up. Fortunately, and again, because we wanted to be consistent and we wanted to standardize it, we have, when the agencies propose their plans on how they're going to recognize people, they had to send those to us, and we reviewed them from a legal perspective and also an equity perspective. Okay, are we treating our people right, and does this make sense? So before they received that money, we had to, as a state agency of personnel administration, approve that. So, and that, we look at it from the perspective of, does it make sense? Are you discriminating? Are you really recognizing your high performers, and what's the criteria that you're recognizing them under? And that process will work the same for 09 also.
I hope that may be the key. You're talking about advertising for jobs or getting people to come on board. I think one of the main criticisms that we hear in the halls and elsewhere from the state agencies is, we get in to and being employed by the state, but there's no increase. I mean, they get trained, they start working in some private agency or takes them over, and we lose a lot of people. Right. So hopefully this incentive may retain what we've been losing to the outside sources.
Right, and I think y'all have probably heard some discussion about the overall comp and benefit study that we did over the last year, and that's one of the reasons we're talking about. Do we need to relook at pension? Is there things that we need to do from a pension perspective for new employees? And it's all about your point, being able to retain people. In the private industry, things are different from a comp and benefit perspective. And you're right. One of the things that we hear a lot, state troopers, we bring them in and we spend a lot of money training them. There's a lot of training money that goes into those folks. And then the next thing we know, they're out working for some city government or county government. So, we've got to be able to put the hook in those people and make sure that we get our money's worth from the training perspective for the state.
One last thing on the applying for the jobs. I know in the past it's been manual. If you want to work with DOT, you got to go to DOT, get the form, and a lot of paperwork involved, and a little bit confusing. On your website, will the various departments, they would still have to apply through that department? Are you going is it going to be a consolidate? I mean, if they put it out there, or will it be still the department to interview and hire, or will it come through the merit system? How
the way we want to handle that is from the average citizen. We want it to be transparent. All they're going to know is they're looking at one web page and they're applying for a job on that web page. Now, in reality, what will happen? They'll look at that page, but if they're interested in a law enforcement job, they will go to Department of Corrections HR group from a staffing perspective and apply for that job online. But it's not that they're going to have to sit down and fill out a form and they have to go through the Department of Corrections or DOT to get that there. So from the citizen standpoint, it's going to be transparent. All they're doing is looking at one page and they're applying for a job.
Good. Okay. Anybody? I appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order, or back to order, I guess. This is the General Government Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee calling the meeting back to order. And first up is driver services. Thank you for coming today. I'll make sure I got your there. You're on now. This is for the benefit of the subcommittee here. This is the first year. This is a new addition to our subcommittee for one of the agencies that we review. And we'd had a short meeting back in December sometime. But if you would, since this is your first time, I think, coming before the subcommittee, if you'd introduce yourself and tell us your title and a little bit about the agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, today, if I could introduce a couple of staff members with me because they may be here in my absence in case. I'm Greg Dozier. I'm the Commissioner of Driver Services. I have Kathy Malone here. She's the Director of Customer Service Support, which has finance, HR, all the support functions in the agency. Michelle Jordan is our Budget Officer, and Les Hammonds is our legislative person. So you'll more than likely see all of us in your meetings, but if not, you'll at least see one or two of us in your meetings to present to you and try to answer any questions you have. We do not have a supplemental budget request, so I guess most of my time will be today just introducing the agency to the committee. I'm not completely new to the committee. I actually worked with you guys for a number of years over in the Office of Planning and Budget. I was a division director over general government and public safety agencies and worked with your committee pretty extensively several years ago. So I'm glad to be back before you, and we did have a very good meeting with the chairman just a month or so ago. But we do have an exciting budget that's coming before you this year. Very proud of the work that the agency has done over the last several years. We have reduced time of wait down to minutes on average. We're somewhere around 5 to 9 minutes on average wait time now to get your license. That has changed dramatically over the last 3 years from where we had some waits as long as 2 hours up in the North Cobb area and Marietta areas, and now those are in the minutes. So we're very proud of that. I appreciate the support the General Assembly has given us over the last 2 years, because that's played a big factor in that, and look forward to it this year as well. We do have, to kind of give you a basis, we're about a $60 million budget. We have about 900 full-time staff people. We have 64 centers across the state that issue license. Our headquarters is in Conyers, Georgia, which we do house somewhere around 300 employees, which includes all of the headquarters operations. When you look at HR, finance, budget, we have an investigative arm that works on license fraud that works out of that office and works statewide. But we are a bigger agency than most people think about. And a lot of times when you look at what's our mission, and that's what we'll talk about when we get to the 09 budget, is how do we balance the customer service end of things, which is what most of the time you guys hear about, but we also balance security, because Homeland Security is looking to the license to be one of those key factors to protect the state and the nation. We really believe in the integrity of our product, and that's something that Georgia has long lived, is that we have always been a strict state to get a license in, and that means that we are a very secure state, and that also means that the integrity of a product, when it says the person's name on that license, it means what it says. So we've always had proof of residency requirements. We've always required you to prove your identity, and that's made Georgia a leader as far as security goes. But we weren't always a leader in customer service, and we've brought that up. This year we'll be talking about Real ID Act with you. That's something that we won't have a huge budget impact this year, but next year it will. As you know, the federal government has passed a law called the Real ID Act. It requires states to adopt some rules and regs as it relates to licensing to be a compliant state. If you're not compliant, then your citizens would have to get a passport in order to fly, go in a federal building, go into a nuclear plant, or a few other areas. So what we'll be spending a lot of time probably after session is educating yourselves and others for the upcoming session on what the impact of that is. The final rules were finally adopted just 2 weeks ago. My agency's in the process right now of reviewing those rules. It was over 300 pages. The federal government has, through their press announcement, reduced a lot of those requirements. The overarching burden on the states went from $14.6 billion nationwide over 10 years down to $3.9 billion statewide over 10 years. So there was a lot of fanfare about the stringent requirements, the cost that states were going to have in that area, and the final rules took a lot of that into account. And as we finish our review, we'll be educating you guys on what we believe the true impact is on Georgia, and as we move forward, how we make that determination whether to be compliant or not compliant on that. A couple other things just to make note. We'll be talking a lot about our contact center with you. That's one of our focal points. The Department of Driver Services operates the largest contact center when you talk about call volume in the state. We don't run the largest as far as number of employees or anything of that nature. We're very proud of the efficiency of that center, but we do have some service level improvements that we'll be focused on. And we also are definitely the one that contacts most citizens. We think about 6.9 million drivers being the state and over a couple 100,000 people having state IDs. You think about a 10-year renewal cycle, and you think not many times do you come in. Last time I went in was 4 years ago when you had a 4-year license. I got a 10-year license now. Probably next time I'll come in is 10 years. But the reality is that's not really how it works. We have so many people that have to come in because of license suspensions, lost license, change of name, change of address, that we actually in person wait on about 2.7 to 3.2 million people a year. Last year it was 3.2 million. While at the same time we do somewhere around 800,000 transactions via the web. So when you talk about the impact that we have on the customers on a daily basis, we usually work with somewhere around 4 million people a year when you're talking about licensing, and that's a lot of our population when you talk about it. So a lot of times when you hear from your constituents, I hope it's a positive thing. I hope it's not a negative thing. I know that we still have areas to improve, but we're very proud on those improvements, and hopefully you're hearing those positive comments. And Mr. Chairman, I'd love to answer any questions or go in more detail on any specific item you may have based on our conversation, but that's kind of my overview.
Okay, we do have a question here, Chairman Williams.
Greg, I really appreciate the new facility we got up in Dalton, Whitfield County. That has worked out real well, and we appreciate the fine work y'all did in getting that done. How is the commercial licensing? Is it working better now? I know for a while there was a kind of a backlog and some disgruntled people couldn't get them and that sort of. Is it pretty well ironed itself out?
Yes, sir. That's a great question, and we were real proud to come up into Whitfield County and open up our fifth CDL testing site. A beautiful facility up there. That was a start of solving the problem, and we're well on our way. Probably 2 years ago, we had somewhere around a 12-week wait to get tested on CDLs. What we did to try to knock that down was we started looking at how can we better utilize our time and how can we expand our reach statewide, and that was one of the initiatives coming up to Whitfield County and to go down into the Albany area. We were kind of central. We only had a place in Milledgeville, a location in Jackson, Georgia. I'm trying to think, Kathy, what was it? Gainesville, that's right, and Thompson. We had those 4 locations. And what that meant was we just weren't able to service a number of folks who were looking to get that license. So we've got a new one in Albany. We've got a new one up in Whitfield, up in Dalton. And we're looking at Glenn County down in Brunswick. That's our next one that's about to open up. The other thing that we've done, and we're piloting right now up in Gainesville, is a lot of your schools are the ones that were tying up a lot of time. And if you can imagine on a CDL test, it's a 2-hour test. So when you talk about one employee doing a 2-hour test a day, you can only do so many tests in a day. We have started working with the school up in Gainesville, and I'm going blank on that school, but we've piloted an initiative where we hold a block of time instead of saying each individual has to have a reservation. We've said on Tuesday and Thursdays it's going to be your time to test, and that way we don't have no-shows. We don't have the issue of somebody applying to come in and not coming in, or the school bringing the wrong person in because of that causing problems. So we've been able to knock it down to where in Albany, Thompson, other places you can get the test within the week. Others like Whitfield County, I think it's about a 3-week wait. In Gainesville, where we have a big demand, and down in Milledgeville, where we have a big demand, we still have about a 5-week wait, but we've knocked it down tremendously. Once we open Brunswick, that's going to go a long way, and a couple of other initiatives will go a long way to knocking it out completely. But thank you for that question.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
And excuse me, Mr. Chairman, for being late. I had another Banks and Banking Committee. I think we're already starting the time of year where we're crossing over, so I don't know if this question had been asked. But have we discussed the amount of revenue that you brought in under Joshua's Act this last year?
No, sir, we have not.
Approximately, what is the net income so far off that program?
I'm going to ask Michelle to correct me, but I believe last year we brought in $9.5 million, right around 9.5. I'd have to find out what the point is. It was 9 point something, Mr. Chairman.
And is the legislative intent, of course, with that was to utilize that money for drivers training. About how much of that $9 million has the governor's proposal allocated for the utilization of that money?
Very good question. This question kind of dates back for a couple of years, so for the benefit of the committee, kind of start off, Joshua's Law passed 3 years ago, and that requires all 16-year-olds to have driver's ed in the state of Georgia in order to get a license, or they have to wait till age 17. Along with that law passing, there was a 5% add-on to all citations that would go toward driver education funding, and as the chairman stated, there's in the law it says it's the intent of the General Assembly to appropriate the prior year collections the following year. The first year, I believe, we collected $5.6 million. The next year was around $9 million, and this year it's looking to be around the $9.5 million as well. The last 2 years of funding has been $2.7 million, Mr. Chairman, and it's $2.7 million again this year in the governor's rec. That money we have, of course, we've only had the 2 years of the $2.7 million, but I think the commission has done great work with that $2.7 million. In that $2.7 million, nearly, I think it's about $4.4 million, a little over $4 million, went back to the local school systems, the public school systems. The problem we had is when Joshua's Law passed, we had about 100 public school systems that offered driver's ed, and we had 100 private schools that offered driver's ed, and only about 20,000 teenage drivers were going through driver's ed. So we had an affordability issue, an accessibility issue, and then, of course, an effectiveness issue, which is something that's going to have to take some research to get to the effectiveness part. But in looking at how to maximize the dollars that we had been appropriated, the commission moved forward on releasing the majority amount of that money toward the public high schools in order to try to expand how many young drivers took driver's ed. And through that effort, and it hadn't been implemented yet, the funds have been released in 2 stages. But through that grant effort, the state has enhanced the number of slots available for teens by 17,500 slots. So by next year, through those monies that have been appropriated, 17,000 additional teenage drivers will be getting it through the school system. What we also know is that if you look at how many kids took driver's ed last year, because we can tell that through your 16-year-old people who got driver's ed, I believe it was around 67,000, a little over 60,000. I don't want to mislead you. A little over 60,000 teenage drivers took driver's ed last year. So it was a phenomenal increase from that 20,000 that we had 2 years ago. So we have set up a foundation for whatever funds are appropriated through the appropriations process, that we can allocate those monies back to the public school systems for expansion of driver's ed and further that endeavor. So great question. Thank you.
Okay, because I'm a great believer that if we have a legislative intent, and that's why we pass some of these laws, to do something with the money, then we should in fact be held to that. And I guess my follow-up question is, if we did appropriate, let's take our wildest dreams here, all the money that we intended to, could that money be utilized and put into effect? Or is there the schools that could apply for and could actually utilize that money if it was to be freed up for use?
I believe there is. What I can tell you for a fact is when we opened up the first grant, which was a little over $2 million, and then the same grant applied to the next $2 million, we had over 9 million requests just in the one grant cycle. So that grant has not been opened up for the main purpose of not providing false hope to people and not causing folks to think that they're applying for a grant where they could get money. But I believe that, of course, if there was another round of grants, there would be additional need. Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if I may ask, in our
Yes, please.
deliberations, and you're looking at this, as Joshua's Law was not designed as a tax for the citizens of the state of Georgia, but actually the money was intended to be used for driver's education, and teen driver's education still continues to be a hot subject throughout the entire state, that on any opportunity that we would have to appropriate additional funding directly up to the amount that has been collected the prior year as intended by the legislation, I would encourage us to appropriate as much as possible there to the Commissioner and to the Department.
Thank you. I think we have another question. Chairman Smith.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good
Doing
afternoon.
a great job.
Thank you.
You used the word foundation. Is this money, when this money comes in, does it go to a foundation or does it go to the general fund?
The money is collected and goes to the general fund, and then it's up to the General Assembly to appropriate the monies. The monies are then deposited in the Department of Driver Services only for caretaking for the commission. There's a Driver's Ed Commission, which I chair, and there's 7 other members that actually oversee the allocation of that money. But it's a pass-through as far as my agency goes, but I do chair that commission that oversees the funding.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I wanted to make sure I understood too. Now tell us again, the money that comes in that we collect for Joshua's Law, what is that? What fine or fee is that?
It's all traffic citations.
All traffic?
Yes, sir. It's an add-on fee to a traffic
Add-on,
citation.
how much is the add-on?
5%.
5%?
Yes, sir.
All traffic violations.
And how that works is your court system collects it as they collect the fee. It's then remitted to the Superior Court Clerk's Authority.
Okay.
And then the Superior Court Clerk's Authority remits it to the general fund, to the Treasury.
Right. And then tell me again, what is the, how much has been collected total so far, and how much is actually going into the training so far?
Let me get the committee the exact figures, because I apologize, but it was the first year, I believe, was around 5.6 million, and then a little over 9 million the last 2 years. And as far as appropriations goes, we have received 2.7 million each of the last 2 years.
Okay, so it's about, I mean, am I wrong? About 22 million, something like that's been brought in?
I'm thinking it was 19 to 20 million if you add all 3 years up. Yes, sir.
19 to 20, and so about 4 to 5 million has actually been put into it.
So far, we've gotten 5.4, and then an additional 2.7 million, I believe, is in the governor's recommendation for 09.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, through the am I still on? Turn myself off. Through the appropriations process, or through the, not the appropriation process, but when your agency goes through the process of going to OPB with your requests for the budget, and I mean, I'm just asking you, trying to understand this, and nothing against your agency at all, but would something like this, would this be something that, or the amount of funds that was collected, is that something that you all ask for, or is that just something the governor puts in there, or how does that, is that just purely from the governor's office that particular, the amount that has been put in the budget, is that purely from the governor's office, or is that from a request from you all, or how does that work?
The agency did not request anything on driver's education. We requested based on our department, and as you know, the instructions from the governor's office of planning and budget was you could request for 2% and also had to submit a 2% reduction. So as far as our request of driver services, since that's pass-through money, it was not included in that 2% add or 2% reduction request.
Okay.
Now, having said that, we definitely have talked about the same issue that we just talked about here. I've talked about the issue with the analyst, talked about the foundation we've set, and the agency is well aware of the exact conversation we've just had.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that this, what we have from the governor is his, this is his version or his recommendations to the General Assembly for the budget. And we're talking about legislative intent, but in fact, we get into the situation, or the posture is that I think the public thinks that it is us that has underfunded this, or I don't know that it's underfunded, but has that we have put much less money into it than has been brought in. But in fact, I mean, with those kind of numbers coming from the governor's office, it makes it almost impossible for us to ever recover that. I mean, we'd have to make tremendous cuts someplace else. But that's, and I'm not lecturing you. I'm just for the benefit of all of us up here and in the room, and anybody that might be listening via the web, for us to get that back for this year to the amount of funding the amount of money that's actually come into the general fund would be almost impossible. It would be impossible, really. Practically, it would be in practice impossible to do that. So I think that there's been some good questions raised, and we know that you all are doing a good job, and I appreciate that with that. I do have another question here, Chairman Williams.
Follow up on that. I know that we've allocated or created various trust funds for monies, and this is no different than our hazardous waste trust fund, solid waste trust fund, and those funds seem to be robbed to go other places. Had the amount of money had you received, could you have used all the money that was collected? Could you use that rather than just a portion of it coming to you? Would it have been nice to have what was actually levied for that driver ed?
Yeah, really what I can base an answer on that's factual on that is just basically the real facts on the first grant we sent out, being that we had $9.4 or $5 million worth of requests in that first grant application. So that gives us and you a feeling for what the potential is out there as far as the need.
When in the budget formulation with the governor, did y'all indicate that you'd like to have the monies that was collected, or was this something he just arbitrarily put in there?
We did not include a request to cut nor add on that as far as our budget submission went. We focused solely on the DDS budget.
Okay, thank
you. Okay, I don't see any further questions. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we look forward to seeing you again for the 2009 budget hearings.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, Department of Natural Resources. Do you have a copy of the tracking document?
Yes, sir, I do.
What page are you on?
Page 15 of 22.
Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving this opportunity to be here, and I really look forward to coming back before you when we discuss our 09 budget requests that we discussed with the Joint Appropriations Committee. I'll echo what Director Dozier said in that we only have some very, very minor housekeeping changes in the 08 supplemental. However, Dr. Couch does, in fact, have some things to discuss in terms of the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund that you were just mentioning. And after I finish answering any questions that you may have, she's going to come up to discuss that particular fund. But as I said, as you see on that tracking document, it's zeros all the way across. So since you're familiar with my division and I've come before you for several years, I think the most appropriate thing to do at this time is just open it up for any questions that you may have.
Okay, I do see a question. Representative Chairman Hill, I think, was first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for coming in, and we appreciate the zeros all the way across. And if I may, I'm just going to ask a request for the 09, which is stepping here, but just something to consider before coming back. I noticed in that once again, the Lake Allatoona Preservation Authority has been zeroed out in the request. Between now and the time that we talk on the 09 budget, could somebody from your department please present to the committee the justification for doing that? I'm fairly familiar with what I believe that they do, and particularly in the water situation we are now, I think that's an extremely important facility, but there must be some justification from at least the governor's office for recommending once again to zero that out on the budgeting, and I was hoping so we won't have to do it in here, that we might be able to discuss that or at least look at that between now and then. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and if I might, Michelle, if I'm not mistaken, I thought there was $100,000 in the 09 budget. It's in there.
It is? Okay, my
now,
document is...
Maybe where you're missing it is that's simply pass-through money. And again, it's not unlike what the director before me mentioned. That's not something we typically handle in our budget instructions from the governor's office in an enhancement or a cut. That money is typically left alone, and I think it's in there. It's in there
Maybe
this year.
Maybe I didn't see that because of it wasn't an increase, so I'll double check that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Chairman Lynn Smith.
Good afternoon.
Yes, ma'am.
It might be helpful for our committee to understand, and maybe for the people who are also viewing this, what we mean when we talk about legal fees paid to the law department and what cases are outstanding that the Attorney General's office has to defend on our behalf.
Well, I'll try to answer that from the Wildlife Resources Division, but again, that's such a minor amount of money, but those dollars, those state dollars were rolled out in savings that we took from the administrative program, which is in my office, and we reflected those funds being transferred from the various agencies that incur those charges. In the case of the Wildlife Resources Division, those amount to defending ourselves on boating under the influence laws, or cases that are challenged or moved through the court system, and there are various other places in Wildlife Resources. A substantial amount of those funds, and I think it's most appropriate for Dr. Couch to address that, fall within the Environmental Protection Division.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any.
Thank you, and I look forward to being back in a few days.
All right, thank you for coming today.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to be before the appropriations hearing this afternoon to discuss with you the 08 request from the governor. The Hazardous Waste Trust Fund, the governor is requesting the Assembly's consideration of a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $6.3 million. The base budget for fiscal 08 included a $7.6 million appropriation, and the $6.3 million additional would bring the total expenditures out of the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund to a total of $13.9. Please note that in the collections that are available from FY07 that would be spent in the FY08 time frame, our collections are in the amount of $14.9 million. We are generally conservative in what we asked the governor to request in his budget because we can't necessarily anticipate the full amount of fees, and so this is largely a full appropriation with that margin of being conservative in the allocation of the hazardous waste trust funds. Let me tell you a little bit about our priorities for spending those funds. One of the important things that this fund is able to assist in paying for, and it's part of the statutory requirements for the use of the fund, is of course the reimbursement to local governments who are involved in the cleanup of landfills. We have reimbursement requests that are pending from about 62 jurisdictions across the state, and the balance of the resources and priorities for funding would go to the reimbursement of local governments for expenses associated with their cleanup activities that have already been incurred locally. That is the one item I wanted to bring to your attention, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the subcommittee? No questions. I can't think of anything. I'm trying to think of a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Think of one. Thank you very much for coming today. Department of Revenue.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
Good afternoon.
I'm Chris Walker. I'm the Finance Director for the Department of Revenue, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. We're on page 17 of 22 in the tracking document.
Thank you, Woody.
And as you see there, we only have one item in the amended request, and it is strictly the pass-through money for the homeowners tax relief grant. It's the $2.5 million. As Commissioner Graham had mentioned in the joint appropriations hearing, we had engaged Dr. Haganey of Georgia State to provide some in-depth analysis and projections this year, and for the 09 budget request as well. And it's based on an estimated growth of 1.84% annually. And if there's any questions we can answer, I'll be glad to try to do so.
Any questions? I don't see any question. I did want to ask you, yesterday or the day before, whenever, I guess it was the day before yesterday, when the Revenue Commissioner came over to the joint hearings. I want to make sure I get this right. Now, he was telling us that the revenue collections go into an account with CNS Bank.
Well, those are the individual estimated payments. That's all we're doing at this point in time, and that's through Bank of America.
Bank of America, excuse me.
They actually, they do not go into Bank of America's account. They go into our account and into the Treasury.
Well, I guess, and I'd ask him about that, but I didn't ask my question really correctly. I mean, it's a pretty substantial amount of money that's going into that account at Bank of America. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We've only gone live. We just actually went live last week, and I don't have that number with me right now.
Just
so
live last week?
Yes, sir.
Well, the reason I'm asking that, we had some questions this morning about some banking issues, and I'm just wondering for having those kind of balances at the bank. I mean, we must be getting something back for that from the bank, right? I mean, they're using that money. They're using a large amount of state taxpayer money for the benefit of the bank and their procedures. I mean, we must be getting something back for that.
Actually, and we'll get you a formal response on that, Mr. Chairman, but my understanding of that is that they're actually going into the state's account or the Department of Revenue's account,
I understand.
in that case. And so the state is actually collecting the interest, and I certainly understand what you're saying about the bank actually having the funds deposited, and we'll get you a formal response on that.
I mean, I'll just, use example this morning. If you open a little account with the bank, they'll give you a toaster or something. with that kind of money,
Yes,
I would think they would give you something, And I'm just wondering what it is, and that's all.
Probably a charge card.
I promise it's not.
All right. Well, I don't see any questions. Thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you.
today.
Appreciate it.
Let's see. We're just a few minutes ahead, but I see Madam Secretary of State is here, and if you're ready.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Thank you for giving me the chance to be here. I am going to refer you to pages 18 and 19 of 22 in the tracking sheet, and I'm just going to draw your attention to a couple of the items, specifically 41.0.2. And all of those funds, those are simply to move funds from various divisions within the agency in order to establish properly under the budget rules the Inspector General's office. So it's moving all of our investigators around. It is simply a transfer of funds from divisions over. It is completely revenue neutral. The second item is 41.1.2, and that is the increase in funds to cover projected legal fees. Committee members, you might recall that in the last hours of last year's session, there were any number of changes made, and one of them was to reduce, quote, legal fees from certain agencies because of the funds that have been allocated to the governor's legal fund. These funds were taken from our budget, but we never had any legal funds to start with. So there wasn't anything to cut, so this was a raw cut that came out, and we are respectfully asking for that, those funds to be restored. And then the last item, and perhaps the most important, is 41.5.3, and that has to do with our request for additional funds regarding the photo ID education and outreach effort. These funds are to cover the cost of our outreach efforts for the February 5th presidential primary and then also for the July regular primary. Candidly, we have expended the funds already, taking a leap of faith for the legislature. I made a commitment to the courts. I think all of you know how important the education and outreach effort was in the ultimate court decision, favorable court decision for district court, and I felt I had a constitutional responsibility to do that education and outreach, and I would respectfully ask for those funds to be put in the budget in the amended 08 so that we can make our budget whole on that. And with that, I will answer any questions you might have.
Okay. We have questions from members of the subcommittee. Chairman Williams.
Good afternoon. Long time no see.
Yeah. It's a surprise. The first one that's come before us and made us aware to get our approval of whatever in redistributing the funds within the department. Usually that happens. We don't ever know about it. So I appreciate you being candid with us and open with us to where these funds are going. And certainly the one you've talked about with voter ID is critical. I commend you for your work in getting that approved constitutional. I think it'll benefit all of the people of Georgia.
Well, thank you. One thing that members of the committee that you will always be able to count on me to do is to be honest with you. Having been an executive in the corporate world, I'm very familiar with the budget term sandbagging, and I hate it, and I will never do that to you because I've been on your side of the table. If I need funds on the budget, I'm going to be honest with you and lay it straight out and give you the facts to back it up.
Thank you. Chairman Smith, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here today. And my question is not directed to what you just spoke to, but I'm receiving several phone calls about some licensing questions. And so, Mr. Chair, if I just could ask this one question. It has to do with contractors' licensing process. and I bet all of y'all are getting these phone
Yes.
calls. So it sounds to me that we're still kind of having almost an avalanche of applications, or several of these applicants not understanding the process and being denied, and they have grave concerns about taking tests that are going to kick in. So it would help to have a little bit more depth of understanding and some possible temporary solutions, because it sounds to me like the intention of our legislation sometimes is not quite being followed. We're not trying to put all these people out of work. We just want to be sure they're qualified. So I would love some kind of insight, just for maybe us to be debating, how do we not try and do the right thing, but we really are putting people out of business, especially at this difficult time.
Sure. And I anticipated that I might get some questions on this. First of all, I did have distributed to each of your offices a very detailed multi-page Q&A document that went through many of the details. Representative Smith, much of what you're experiencing now, candidly, is what I think is a very natural transition of trying to take a very large profession from being unregulated to being regulated, and the legislative body would not have felt it appropriate to regulate this profession if they didn't have some very solid evidence that there were certain people practicing the profession that indeed were not qualified. So obviously we're going to have some folks who simply don't meet the standards to obtain those licenses. What I will say is it's very important to know that these, quote, denial letters that have gone out, they are not denials of a license. It is simply telling the individual that they did not qualify to be exempt from taking the licensing test. They still have every opportunity to do that, and in fact, those individuals who did not qualify for exam exemption even have the opportunity to have an appearance before the contractor's board to present additional evidence and materials if perhaps they felt that there was more things that the board should know about, and the board has been extraordinarily diligent around all of this. They are holding additional meetings. They are prepared to meet as often as they need to accommodate all of the requests for appearances before them. We are, much of what you've seen is that, through the course of the past 2 years, remember the requirement for the license and the exam exemption request period was extended several times. And so the last extension was over the summer. So of course, leading up to that, we had another onslaught of requests. And we've gotten through, I believe we had 17,500 or so applications for exam exemption, and all of except maybe 1,500 have been worked, and those individuals have been notified. Almost 10,000 were approved. Close to 6,000 plus were not. So it is a very high period. Exactly. Yeah. And many of these folks, and I will tell you, for the reasons for denials, go across the gamut. Some of them maybe were in business for 4 years and 3 months. Well, the requirement in the statute is 5 years. And there's nothing I can do to get them over that hurdle. There's nothing the board can do to make them have 5 years. Some were not approved because they didn't have the right kinds of contracting projects. Again, if they've not done a project per the statute or the rules adopted by the board, that's a really hard hurdle to get over. However, many of them received letters telling them that their application was missing some piece of information, was deficient in some way. And unfortunately, a great many of those folks just didn't respond. And what we tell people and what we would like your help with is encourage those individuals to request an appearance before the board and bring the materials that were missing. And the board has absolutely, when the right documents are presented, they are reversing course and cleaning up those applications. So that option is available for everyone.
Thank you, and I can appreciate what you're doing just based on the calls I'm getting. So I do understand that. And the fact that the Contractors Board is meeting more frequently, I think, is an excellent idea. And I just know we're going to continue getting these calls and getting more of them. And is there, I don't know how to express this exactly right, but let's just say I think a lot of people in this profession have not chosen to go to college. And so when they hit all these different requirements, some of them have told me they've actually figured out they've had to hire attorneys to help them do all of this. And so, and I know it's an open book test if they have to take a test, but it's 8 hours over a 2-day period, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And so I know that that is intimidating, and they are seeing that, that they're seeing that they're not going to have work. And so, and I appreciate what you're doing. I just think that what I'm trying to do here is alert my peers, my fellow legislators, that we do, again, have a very serious problem because, quite frankly, a lot of these people would not choose to go to college. And so some of what they're having to do, although they're very skilled at what they do, I'm even wondering if they could pay an extra fee and have an on-site examination without being tested. I'm just hoping there's some ways to meet the requirements of what the legislative intent was, but not be an onerous burden to the board or to them.
Well, what do you mean by an on-site test?
Well, for example, when I used to teach school, I had some people that I knew couldn't read that well, but I would go sit, do oral exam with them and make sure they knew the material. Or if they are a builder, but not good at responding and answering and documenting, etc., could they pay an additional fee? And what they're doing is essentially the board is sanctioning certain people to come and observe their work and grade them on their work, as opposed to written. I have no idea.
Right.
I just know
and
that
I don't know if that would be
and I don't know either.
Yeah, a practical way. I mean, there are. I mean, keep in mind there are. I mean, truly, we've just heard from the probably the first 25% of individuals who are engaged in the contracting profession. I mean, I don't know what the dollars would be to have people go on site for tens of thousands of people. What I will say is, you know, obviously, if a person cannot read or write, there are resources for that. Yeah. I don't know that there's no requirement about college, and many of you know this. I don't look at not having a college degree as a barrier for things. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing before you.
I was talking more of skill level.
Sure.
Using college as that reference for it.
I mean, look, I don't think anyone's intention was to try to have anyone not be able to practice their profession. But I do believe clearly it was the legislature's intention that there were individuals engaged in this profession who ought not to be engaged in it. And there are some basic minimum levels of skill and knowledge and understanding that the legislature and the board of contractors adopted that they would like to have people adhere to within these professions. And, you know, also understand that the rules that were adopted, they weren't adopted in a vacuum. They were adopted in partnership with the Home Builders Association of Georgia, with the Black Contractors Association of Georgia, with the Georgia Contractor, I forget the other one, UCA or whatever it's called, with many, many groups providing input and assistance on all of that. And the home builders and the other associations, they offer tutorials as well to help do test prep coming into the test, and we are trying to make sure that everyone knows that that option is available to them as well. And again, you know, I hate it that, because again, as an elected official, I know how hard it is to get, you know, angry calls and disappointed calls from constituents. We're getting them too. Candidly, I don't know how. Anytime you are going from taking something completely unregulated to being regulated, this is just part of what is going to happen. And I would, you know, be less than honest if I didn't say to you that the calls are probably going to continue until, you know, after July, probably towards the end of the year. And then the calls are going to shift to, dadgummit, get somebody out here to shut down this unlicensed practicer. So, I mean, it will be a transition period, and you've all been so supportive and helpful, and we are here for those cases to help you, so don't hesitate to refer those over. And certainly the board is mindful that the rules and things might need to be tweaked down the road, and they try to look at that and rely upon actual practicing professionals in that industry to help them.
And to your point, also, the board is voluntary, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
They have put in
I
so much
appreciate
effort,
that.
so be nice to those folks. They have been doing a great job.
I appreciate that, too. And thank you for this. But one number, so only 25% response has been received by everybody?
I'm saying in terms of, if I look out across the whole profession, how many people do I think are doing contracting work? It's probably some number much more significant than the 20,000 who have applied for exam exemption. The next wave is going to be that group of people who applied to take the test, and we are ready with that. We have talked to the vendor. We have 2 different avenues for someone to test. Again, we encourage everyone to take advantage of the prep courses offered by the associations. They're very, very helpful. And then you can take your test either in the Macon office or the Tifton office or Atlanta, but also the private vendor offers the test at secure sites around the state, and we've made sure that the vendor knows that we could see a real crescendo in the request for tests, and that vendor need and will be ready to go to start to add additional waves of testing to accommodate everyone, because we don't want to be in a place where someone is ready to take the test and then we're not ready to let them take it, so we're not going to let that happen.
And one final question, too, that you can tell I've had a baptism of fire on this issue also.
Believe me, I share that. I'm plucking the water off right now.
But I'm trying to, there can be an agent of record for the company who could take the test if it was necessary. I'm trying to understand someone's explaining all these different processes available to a person who works with their hands. If the company has someone else who's qualified and works for the company, as long as someone is qualified who's attached to that company. There are other avenues out there is what I'm trying to get to also.
Yes, if I had Karen Handel Construction Company, Inc., and it was my company, but my brother would be the contractor license holder. It's what's called a dependent license. I believe I have that right. So there are other options, and I'd be happy to have someone come by and really sit down with you and walk through all of those details, because it does kind of get into some nitty-gritty, some things, and I would want to not speak off the cuff too much to mislead you or misguide you. So maybe what we could do, could I call your office later and set something up?
I'm thinking
and I'll have
all
a
this.
guru come talk to you.
You know what? I'm probably your first legislator to be talking about this. You've got 179 other ones, I'm sure, that are going to. What we'd probably like instead is a way to refer someone to someone in your department. That would be great.
Just send them over to our office, and that's our job. Just send them on over. You don't even have to transfer them. If you could just ask whoever is taking down your phone calls to get their name and their phone number and their company name, and then send it on down to our office to Michael O'Sullivan. He is the liaison for all of the legislators, and we will get someone to look at it and talk to the person and guide them through what their options would be.
And he's very approachable, so I appreciate that, too. I've already been talking to him. But
very good.
You. Thank you very much.
I can help her a little bit along that line.
Thank you very much. Representative Williams knows it better than I do inside and out. He's had to live it longer than me, too, so.
Chairman of the House Banking Committee, Mr. Mills down here has been waiting for a while. You have a question? Okay.
A while back to invest in the new Georgia, which was going to implement a new procurement procedures in place throughout different agencies. And I'm just curious, were there any savings realized through this program in the Secretary of State's department?
There were. What, you want to talk to it? And then I will, I hate to even bring up the phrase, but while Mickey's coming up to talk about it, I'll rue the day I brought up P cards. And let me tell you what we've done in our agency on the P cards. Even before it hit the paper, when I got wind of how many people had these cards in the Secretary of State's office, I think the phrase they use around my office when I'm upset about something is she's blowing a gasket. And I blew a gasket about the P cards. And so we've pulled them all in, and only division directors have P cards. And interestingly, in our first 6 months in office, we saw an astounding decrease in the usage of P cards and the expenditures of P cards. And, you know, we have a strict policy that they are not to be used for monthly expenses. Frankly, if a division director, if I get a budget briefing every month, and anyone who knows me knows that I love details, and so I get right down to the nitty gritty, and P card abuse is not going to happen in this agency. And so that's one thing that did, I think, sort of come up to the top through that procurement study. But I'll let Mickey McGuire, our finance and admin director, talk to the other part.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Did you have a specific question?
Specifically, I was just, you don't have to be specific items, but do you have an overall figure how much it saved your department?
Not a specific dollar figure. Secretary Handel mentioned we've already seen in the first 6 months, just comparing purchasing card purchases, for instance, we've seen a 54% reduction in the amount of dollars we spent this time last year versus now. Again, using the purchasing card innovations that both the Secretary has implemented, as well as the Department of Administrative Services. Now, they're
about the overall RFP process,
RFP,
the new procurement process.
In terms of telecommunications and computer charges, we've seen about a 15% decrease in the cost that we incurred last year. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a dollar figure for you, but we do want to give, I guess, the proper kudos to the Department of Administrative Services, because we have seen savings in those costs as a direct result of Commission on Georgia.
Right. And I guess what we're wrestling with as a committee is when there is savings realized, then if we're not made aware of it, and if budgets are continually being increased, then there is no savings ever realized in actuality, except for that the money is being spent in another area. And frankly, at this point in the process, I kind of feel like I've been sold a bill of goods. And this is not directed toward you, or so you're doing a great job. I'm just sort of venting, I guess. And I've had other very important meetings I've had to be in today, but I intend to ask every department this question.
Well, we'll get you the specific number. What I can tell you is that on the P card issue, I did send a letter to the House leadership around this issue to let them know what we were doing. On this particular topic, I did not, but we will certainly go back and look at it. What you will see, however, as we get to FY09, we offered up beyond the required amount of reductions. We offered up more than that, and I'm going to do that every year. And indeed, if we get savings from a program, this gets back to sandbagging. If we do have legitimate savings from a program, we'll tell you that we have the savings and how we'd like to reallocate those funds and reinvest them within our agency.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate the job that you're doing, and we look forward to seeing you again before too long for the 09 budget hearings.
Super. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I think we have some, I know we have some attached agencies for the Secretary of State's office here. I don't know if any of you wanted to make any presentation. Ethics Commission? You don't have anything? Okay. Mr. Atkins over here.
Chairman, I have just one thing, if I might.
Okay, if you'll go to the mic there.
I've never used one of these before. Is it all right? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to take a minute for you because I think my assistant Lisa there has got everything handled for me, but we want to talk about our agency, the Drugs and Narcotic Agency, is just a real small agency that we have over here, and you got to get all choked up just looking at you.
You don't have your guitar, you don't have your guitar and your band with you today.
I do a lot better. I could sing this better than I could talk it. Anyway, we've asking for some pay increases for our agents because they're all pharmacists and they're all law enforcement, and our pharmacists in the state make between $80,000 and $100,000 if they work for Medicaid or if they work for the hospital or any of the other agencies of the state. But if you're a pharmacist and you work for drugs and narcotics, then you only make about $50,000 a year. And we'd like to ask you for a one-time increase for all of them, maybe for $25,000 a year for the first year to bring us up to about $75,000 or $80,000. That would be more comparable to what other state pharmacists are making. And as you know, in the retail market and hospitals, the pharmacist makes about $100,000 to $120,000 a year now. So we're going to have a hard time keeping any agents, or we can keep the old ones we have, but we'll have a hard time getting any new ones when these guys retire, and we have about 5 that will be retiring within the next 5 years. And Rick, you want to pass this out for him, please? This is just a little background thing, but anyway, we'd certainly like for you to consider it, and we'd be happy to answer any questions or pass out any information that you might.
Well, we appreciate that. I don't see any questions right now. I wanted to ask you, I mean, looking at these numbers, they don't look very competitive out in the market at all, I wouldn't think, for a pharmacist.
No, they're not. We would have a real hard time, Mr. Chairman, if we lost someone right now trying to hire a young pharmacist to come to work for us, because when they come to work for drugs and narcotics, not only do they have to be a pharmacist, but we have to send them to training and get to be post-certified, and they have to become law enforcement officers also. So it's hard to ask someone to go through 9 weeks of mandated training to be a police officer and also be a pharmacist and then come out and work for $48,000 a year.
Well, how long has it been since I mean, was it ever, were the salaries ever, on a parity with the pharmacist in the outside?
Well, as you know, I would say 8 or 10 years ago, if you made $40,000 with the state, it was comparable to a hospital pharmacist who made about $50,000 at the time. But for some reason, the shortage of pharmacists has just really increased the demand and increased the salaries. And I had brought it over here to show you, but I left it in my seat. I had a postcard this morning from a hospital offering me a job for $138,000 a year. That's almost what I make with the state. No, it's a joke. Fortunately, I was in the legislature for 12 years, so I don't have to have this job. I can work for nothing. Made so much money.
Yeah, well, I know that.
That's another joke, right?
Really.
But anyway, it's been a long time since we've had anything other than a 3% raise that the other state employees get. And for a long time, and it's kind of might have been our fault some, that for a long time we would say we're law enforcement and and that sort of thing. But now we're saying we're pharmacists with the state, and that's why we should be making a pharmacist salary.
Okay. I want to make sure for the subcommittee that we understand exactly what you're asking for. I mean, if you would state it, exactly what it is that you would like for us to do.
Well, as I said, I'd like if we could give a $25,000 per agent a year raise. We only have 11 agents, so we're not talking about a huge amount of money. But $25,000 a year, the one-time raise, would make our average agent make about $75,000 a year.
Okay, and we're talking about probably I mean, you're probably really requesting that to go in the '09 budget, I guess.
Yes, either one of
That'd be
them.
the only place we could even consider doing it, so.
Right. We'd take either one of them.
Well, I understand. Well, you know, looking at these numbers, I mean, they obviously look very low. There's one on here where it looked like his salary went down from 2007.
I think that was mine. No.
Right here. Sunny May.
Sunny May.
Sunny May. It shouldn't have gone down. I don't know if he should have been getting his regular 2 and 3% raise.
Okay. All right. We have any questions from the subcommittee? Okay, Chairman Williams.
Bill, I can certainly sympathize. I had an optometrist over in Chatsworth, talked to a pharmacy in Chatsworth that wanted to hire him on at $58.50 an hour.
Yeah.
Which came out to something like $117,000 a year just starting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, and that's a Chatsworth being a rural area, that was eye-raising, and that just goes to show you what the difference is. That's in a rural area, and then I imagine in the metro area it's even higher.
It really is, Mr. Chairman. We had one of our agents that retired and went to work in Dillard, Georgia, for $40 an hour.
Okay.
It's a real big problem. Once we lose our older agents, then I don't know what we're going to do.
Representative James has a question.
You being a former legislator, I know you understand the salaries that we make.
Yes, sir.
And I know you understand the problem we've had over the years trying to get an increase in pay. Now, my question to you is, if we work to help you get the increase that you're asking for, will you reciprocate?
Well, hey, I was there 12 years. I certainly will.
Well, okay. I don't see any other questions. I think everybody would be receptive to trying to help. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate it very much. And we're right across the street over there at Underground Parking. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer any of them.
I mean, we know how important, the job these people perform is a very important job, and it's important to the health of the people of the state of Georgia.
Yeah, it is an important job, and I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I thought I saw somebody from the Holocaust Commission here a while ago. I think she must have left. Any other tasked agencies to Secretary of State's office?
Real estate commission, but we have nothing.
Okay. All right. I believe that takes care of the Secretary of State's office, to my knowledge, and the State Accounting Office. Did you have anything?
We don't have any 2008 requests.
Okay. Probably not, I don't think. We appreciate you coming, and we really do. And then for the 2009, I'm sure that there'll be questions and some things you'll probably want to present to us. Thank you for coming. I do appreciate it. We do have one more presentation. I don't think we have anybody on our agenda, do we? No. Okay, we have a presentation in relation to the Veterans Affairs. We have some folks here that have come that have a proposal. They've talked to Veterans Affairs about it, and I'll let them introduce themselves and make a presentation. I will say this, if you could, for the benefit of the subcommittee, I know everybody's trying to run and do different things. If you just keep it,
yes, sir,
fairly short, we would
short.
certainly appreciate it.
Well, Mr. Chairman and members, thank you very much. I will be short because I know it's been a long day and I'm on the tail end of it. My name is Ned Hunter. I'm the CEO of a veteran-owned small business located here in Georgia. For the last 7 years, we've been working on and focused on fixing the problem of veterans' benefits and trying to improve the claims process. On Tuesday, I'll be before the U.S. Congress on testimony because the nation has a problem now of 800,000 backlog in claims. We are under contract with Virginia under executive order to take the solution that we've developed as a company here in Georgia and accelerate the claims. So that the problem is rampant. It is a growing problem. We have a challenge within Georgia. We've met with Mr. Wheeler and also Len Glass. They're very supportive. I was at the National Committee meeting in Annapolis in October. So I'm here to ask you if there's any opportunity for funding or language for legislative intent in '08 and to move into '09 so we could parallel with what Virginia will be rolling out into production. And it's quite extraordinary. They have the same number of veterans in Virginia, about 750,000, and a very, very low number of claims. And it is a crisis for the country. But they look at it as if we can just get another 10,000 claims done properly on top of what's already been doing. And the average claim is $10,000. It's between 8 and 12, but on average 10. That's a $100 million injection into the veterans' pockets and into the economy. So we're very excited what we've done. We cut our teeth in U.S. Navy to get all the approvals with the technology. We piloted the program with Virginia last fall and was received, and we are working with the senators. Both of our senators are involved here in Georgia, as well as Congressman Linder and Congressman Price. And we were very blessed to come down here and have this opportunity before the committee because we've been very supported by Emory. I would just like my home state to be involved and not just have Virginia take this to the House, so to speak. So that's what I'm here for. It really boils down to less than 50 cents a veteran, and it's all ready to go. We've talked to numerous states, but again, I just ask if there's any opportunity for us to start working with Georgia this year. I think we could really make a significant impact for our veterans. And I'll take any questions or answer that you'd like to offer, please.
Do we have any questions? I know we have some veterans on the subcommittee, and I know we have one veteran's wife over here. Chairman Williams.
Would this be organization, a private enterprise, would this be a contract with the state, or would you come under the Veterans Administrative Affairs, or how?
Yes, sir. It's a very good question.
What your role would be?
We do now fall under the veteran-owned small business, which has a certain cap. We are not an 8A firm, but we have partnerships. We could do 8A. I was called by Virginia this morning, the commissioner. They want to go sole source because we have a unique technology. It's called TurboVet, and just imagine it's like TurboTax. All we did was take all the questions that a veteran needs to be asked and allow them to get the type of service. So we asked all the questions and the right questions. The federal adjudicators have told us in Roanoke that by just asking the proper question, we will immediately take 100 days off the claims. Virginia, and this is their numbers from their finance committee, it's worth $1 million a day that they're losing or not going into the local veterans because they have their state workers, which is where the work is happening, and we've corroborated this across the states, but that expertise is retiring at a faster rate in which they can replace it. So the new workers don't know all the questions or the right questions to ask a veteran, so the claim is more than 90% not properly being submitted to federal adjudicators and being kicked back. And it's very much a challenge of this nation, and Virginia Governor Kane stepped up, and we approached our politicians, both Les and I are Naval Academy graduates and work within the committees for admissions work, and we said, hey, this is what we're doing, and they said, you need to talk to our representatives within the state. We're very supportive of this issue. So as far as contract, we could go as a veteran-owned small business. We competed it fairly, and now we're under a 5-year contract up there, so we would have to probably compete, or I would put it out as a web-based solution system on behalf of Georgia.
What kind of money would you be talking about in the contract? I mean, do you got an idea of the funding?
Yes, sir, we do. This year we're looking for just 2 months of funding to come down and work with Georgia. That would be $60,000, and on an annualized basis, it's $350,000. Our goal is to nationalize it through the VA at va.gov, but that's going to take a little bit, and that's why I'm before Congress next week.
Representative James?
Just recently, I mailed off 2 separate checks to 2 veteran organizations.
Yes, sir.
Your organization, the organizations out there, I'm sorry to strike you, the organizations that are out there asking us to give money on behalf of vets and help vets, is there any way that your organization can be tied in with these organizations?
Yes, sir. We approached both within Virginia. They have a joint leadership council. They're called Veteran Service Organizations, Disabled American Veterans, American Legion, MOA. That group has been presented in Virginia. It's their #1 legislative issue, all 32 organizations. And last Wednesday, I was on a conference call with Washington with the Foundation for the Future of American Veterans, where the national leadership of the top 6 were briefed on this, and there was no pushback. It's imperative we do that. Over 90% of the claims that are submitted to the federal adjudicators are being done by state workers or represented from the VSOs. That's how the work gets done. And to a person, The commissioners of the veterans commissions within the states are fed up with what the federal government is forcing out on them to get the job done. States have varying degrees of sophistication in how they manage the claim, but overall, that's where the hard work is getting done, to start talking to the veteran to get the claim put together. But if it's not put together right and there's missing paper or missing data, it just goes into a nightmare of slowdown. And that's what we just have on. We've asked all the questions so the veteran realizes, wow, my claim is going to get processed. And for a lot of people, it means eating or staying in their home.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from subcommittee? Well, thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you for the time. It was very much a privilege, and bless you for your work. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Oh. Okay.
I think to answer your question, we think that these funds would be a part of the Department of Veterans Services budget because their field advocates and the veteran service organizations are the ones that would be using this to assist the veteran with the claims process.
This is a software program, right? Is what it is.
It's so much more than that, but to answer your question, yes, ma'am. It replaces
We wrote
paperwork.
Are there competing software programs?
Now, yeah, that's why they went so short. We wrote the software. It's a software as a service. You lease it on a per monthly basis. That's where the trend of it. So,
Thank you. If there are no further questions, comments, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Yes, let me adjourn the meeting here.